Why are the nations in an uproar and the people devising a vain thing? The kings of the earth take their stand and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us tear their fetters apart and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. You can say whatever you want to say, but when you touch the ark and you place your hand on the word of God and pledge to do the very things that blaspheme his name, you talk about a high-risk action. All Uzzah did was what he thought was showing some respect. God doesn't want your respect. He wants your obedience. Don't tell me that you advocate the slaughter of babies in the womb. Don't tell me you want to destroy masculinity, femininity, marriage. Don't tell me you want to fill the world with LGBTQ people in leadership. You want to justify transgender activity. Don't tell me you want to invite more Muslims in who represent a religion from hell and then put your hand on the throne of God.
So that people learn to duck their head and not speak up because bad idea now.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Citizens are advised to take the following steps.
Find us, armoroftruth.net.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Armor of Truth YouTube channel.
This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test.
Greetings, everybody. It is Armor of Truth Live number 192. Good to see you, my friends. Welcome for the midnight edition. Let's dive right into this. Today, we're going to be talking about the state of not necessarily the world, but the state of this nation demoralized. How did we get to be demoralized? How did the United States, who did it? Who is responsible? How'd they do it? What is their plan? We're going to talk about all this. We'll expose it all. And of course, we will not leave you hanging. We'll give you solutions. So I've also been reading just a little bit about from Zbigniew Brzezinski's Between Two Ages, written in 1978, I believe it is. Now he was a man who was an advisor to presidents, to government, to federal government on foreign policy. It's very interesting to read what he had to say in 1978 and compare it to what we see now, because at that point there was a Soviet Union. Today, there is no Soviet Union, but I'm going to argue tonight that the same active measures that the Soviet Union employed to infiltrate, demoralize, destabilize, create a crisis, and then normalize other nations according to their rule, their law, their way, communism. Those measures are still at work today, and they're at work globally, especially in the United States. Over the past many decades, really, these measures have been ramping up. And in 1980, Yuri Bezmenov told everyone what was going on because he had defected. He was one of those KGB agents who defected. We'll talk about that. Let's start off with this. This is a quote from just inside the cover of Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Age by Zbigniew Brzezinski, from Hermann Hesse, Steppenwolf. It says, human life is reduced to real suffering, to hell, only when two ages, two cultures, and religions overlap. There are times when a whole generation is caught in this way between two ages, two modes of life, with the consequence that it loses all power to understand itself and has no standard, no security, no simple acquiescence. And so that sets us up. No standard. We've lost our standard. So let's look at some of our topics. I got to recap a couple stories that have, since we talked to you last time on the Armor of Truth live show a couple of the stories that we covered, the IRS Inflation Recovery Act, some developments there that are pretty interesting. Let's get this right. Here we go. But first of all, regarding Donald Trump's raid, the FBI raid on his house, on his home, on his compound, Mar-a-Lago in Florida. We also spoke about that last Tuesday. Developments there too. What they're saying is, we're going to cover this story in depth in just a moment. I'm just going to touch on it here. August 12th, last Friday, the FBI and Department of Homeland Security issued a bulletin, and it said something like this. They didn't issue it to the public, they issued it to law enforcement agencies. And it said the FBI and Department of Homeland Security have observed an increase in threats to federal and other law enforcement and government officials following the Trump raid. They said specifically in their bulletin that one of the threats that they saw was a threat to place a so-called dirty bomb at the headquarters of FBI. So that sounds pretty serious. And they said that there were general calls for civil war and armed rebellion coming up from, of course, as they will say, coming up from the radical right, the extremist, not really the radical right, just the right. Anyone on the right is an extremist today. So what I want to show you in just a minute is that the media's reporting on this story is inflammatory, right? What the media is accusing the violent extremists on the right of is exactly what they're doing. They're lathering everyone up. They're fomenting violence. So coming up in our main segment in just a few moments, we're going to show you the playbook for this current global push of insanity. How did we get here? Well, there's nothing but propaganda daily. We're going to show you from where it originated, and we will explain to you how it works. As usual, we will not leave you hanging there. We'll give you solutions that you need to overcome it. All right, so let's catch up on these stories from last week. Let's follow up on these. This was an interesting turn of events. This also happened late last week, after we covered it here on Tuesday. The Inflation Recovery Act. It's a quick recap. Let me give you a quick recap. So officially, it was an act that all the Democrats, no Republicans voted for it. All the Democrats put it through in a special session, a special type of legislature where you were only voting on spending. Anyway, It was to cover economic, energy, and healthcare sectors. It was $750 billion. They were very happy to charge that to you. And $3.2 billion actually went to taxpayer services. That would be the money that would be there to help the IRS get better at doing their job, get better at, well, let's just say customer service. They didn't spend very much on that, but what they did spend a lot of money on is $124 billion to weaponize the agency, to weaponize the IRS. $45.6 billion of that went directly to enforcement. The hiring of 87,000 new agents, and of course, some special agents. We've been calling them the social credit system ground troops. You'll see a lot of stories out there, people doing fact checks. The headline will say, no, the IRS isn't coming after regular taxpayers. Well, okay, we'll just take your word for that. How do you define that? How do you define what a regular taxpayer is? If you're someone who's vocal out here, that might not be good for you. You might be someone who would be targeted by this agency, who now, check this out. You see this on your screen, right? It came out last week on the IRS official government website, irs.gov, where you can go on there and look for jobs. And they were hiring criminal investigation special agents. And you can click there to apply. And you can see the box down here that's highlighted. I've got it blown up here for you. That specific line, this was a big deal last week. People were tweeting about this. It created quite a stir. All right, that fourth item in the major duties of this job said, you will carry a firearm. And you must be willing to use deadly force if necessary. I think that's surprising to a lot of people, because you would think maybe that the IRS would depend on, I don't know, another agency, perhaps the FBI or one of the other law enforcement agencies that are available. But no, now, the FBI, they've had this job before. They've already had this in the past. So the problem is now 87,000 new agents. How much bigger are they going to build this army? All right, they have an army now, it seems like. On the website today, now here's what's interesting. This is why I wanted to cover it. On the, as of a few days ago, if you go to the same website where I got that image from, Criminal Investigation, the CI unit, is the law enforcement branch of the IRS. Mission is to serve the American public by investigating potential criminal violations of the IRS code. As a special agent, you'll combine your accounting skills with law enforcement skills. Special agents are duly sworn law enforcement officers who are trained to follow the money. Right? You know what? You want that, right? You want law and order in your country, but we have to be very careful right now, because we don't have a rational administration. And here's the reason. No matter what the source, all income earned, both legal and illegal, even your legal income, has the potential of being involved in crimes which fall within the investigative jurisdiction of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Okay, so legal or not, if they think you're involved in a crime some way, now they're going to have these particular individuals. Some of the key requirements there you can see. Major duties. Oh, look at that. You see, there were 5 right here. There were 5. And the fourth one was carry a firearm and be willing to use deadly force. But today, or as of a few days ago, well, that's gone now. They took that one out. I don't think that that's no longer part of the duties. I just think that someone got on them and said, you don't need to publish that. Yes, we're going to do it, but you don't need to publish it. So there you go. That's the development there. That's all we have. We got a couple. Got a couple little clips here for you.
Demanding a full investigation of the Internal Revenue Service after officials admitted targeting conservative political groups.
Not only did Tea Party groups get more scrutiny, but so did a host of other conservative groups.
Tea Party groups were being targeted.
Stop Biden's shadow army. What they say, stop the Manchin-Schumer bill. Now, Joe Manchin, conservative Republican. Interesting, right? And this from 2013, Lois Lerner pleaded the fifth in a similar circumstance.
Fresh look at evidence against Lois Lerner, the former IRS employee accused in 2013 of targeting Tea Party groups over their political views. Lerner called to testify to Congress, but pleaded the fifth.
Right. No, don't worry. You see the articles, you see the fact checkers out there now. Are you conspiracy theorists? They're not coming after you because of your political views. That's just silly. Really?
IRS employee accused in 2013 of targeting Tea Party groups over their political views. Lerner called to testify to Congress, but pleaded the fifth.
Pleaded the fifth.
Have not done anything wrong.
Now listen to this. This statement here is going to be very important. I haven't done anything wrong, and
I have not broken any laws. One of the basic functions of the Fifth Amendment is to protect innocent individuals, and that is the protection I'm invoking today.
Okay, so what did she say there? I haven't broken any laws. And she's right. So that should make us feel better, right? I would remind you that in all of the major communist regimes that were established in the 20th century, that took hold and were violent, stacking the bodies high, none of what they did was illegal. Right? They took their time to make sure that all of the things, all of the policies they wanted to implement, all of the goals that they wanted to achieve could be done legally. So they just made the laws. They just passed. And isn't that kind of what we see happening here now? Whereas it may have been illegal against the law for a certain agency to come bearing down on you with a Hummer and guys hanging out, commando style. Well, it's not now. It's legal now. They have an army now. So now you're caught up on that little story. Now here's a follow-up to our long coverage of the vaccine mandates, vaccine rollouts, and specifically the religious exemptions. Now, for a few months, we were diligent here to find good ones and to share them with you, and to go. We kind of studied and learned and taught here how to write one for yourself, and a lot of our viewers did that, and I think maybe one or two were successful. No one was accepting that. No, not many employers were accepting that, and that's a problem. It's a big problem. So, a college football coach. First of all, you can see where we're headed today is narrative. And you can see the narrative is right on everyone's face today. It's about virtue signaling. But here is Nick Rolovich, college football coach fired after asking for religious exemption from vaccine mandate, has filed a $25 million claim against his employer. So this story is out of Pullman, Washington. Got this off the AP wire. August 9th, this report came out. And it said that former Washington State head football coach, the Cougars, filed a wrongful termination claim against the university for wrongful termination. Now, that was the report on August. Now let's do a little timeline. Here's what happened. Here's what led up to it. February 2019, Coach Rolovich was hired at Washington State University as the head football coach with a 5-year, $16 million contract. It's about $3.2 a year, with a $3.6 million buyout clause. A lot of money at stake. In July of 2021, as the vaccine mandates were taking effect all over, Nick Rolovich said, quote, "I have elected not to receive CV-19 vaccine for reasons which will remain private. I will not comment further on my decision." And he hasn't. He has been very diligent about just not being in the media and saying a lot of things, just very careful statements. He's sincere about wanting to protect his rights. And particularly this one was religious exemption. So that was July of 2021. A little bit. Now that's before the football season. After the football season, well, as it was beginning, August 9th, 2021, the Governor Inslee of the state of Washington announced a mandate for state employees that almost all state employees would have to receive a shot. So we move on down the line. 2 months into the football season, October 11th, 2021, Washington State University staff are all given 7 days to get vaccinated, or doesn't say, but they were given 7 days to get it. 2 days later, on August 13th, Coach Rolovich applies for religious exemption and was immediately denied. October 18th, 2021, he was fired for refusing the COVID vaccines. Also, now here's an interesting part of the story. 4 of his assistant coaches. Sometimes when you're a coach at this level, you have a group of coaches that you work well with, that if you get hired at a big school, they go with you. It's kind of a package deal. So in a show of loyalty, 4 other assistant coaches also fired. So five coaches in all. That decimated their entire football program in the middle of the season. Now they were dedicated to having this mandate. Well, they were serious about it. It was the most important thing. October 18th, Seattle Times reports. Now, listen to the narrative. Listen to the way they report this. Seattle Times reports, Rolovich's tenure has been marked more by his polarizing stance on the vaccines than what happened on the field. His view was in stark contrast to the one held by his bosses, Washington State University President Kirk Schultz and Athletic Director Pat Chun, who adhere to the science. They adhere to the science that the vaccines are safe and effective, a safe and effective way to prevent illness, as well as they greatly reduce the risk of severe illness. They said this was the president of the university, Schultz, said in the statement, quote, "Vaccines work." That was his comment. Okay, months later, November 2021, Coach Rolovich's attorney files a 34-page appeal letter with the university. That appeal was flatly denied. There is no recourse. You have to do it or you can't be here. That's how it is. So that was last fall. That was last summer and fall. Vaccine mandate comes out. Football season starts. He just plainly states, I'm not doing it, and I'm going to file a religious exemption. I don't think I should have to do this. He said, he even said, I'll do whatever the university needs me to do. I'll mask up. I'll social distance. I'll do whatever you want me to do, but I can't get the jab. Well, this year, a few months ago, April 2022, that's when he filed the $25 million tort claim with the state's Office of Risk Management. And this is an important story because now these things are starting to happen. We want to pay attention to how employers, especially state employers, are handling this. Is anyone successful? And is anyone who's decided to sue, are they going to be successful? So he files the claim in April of 2022, $25 million tort claim. So let's learn. A tort, in legal parlance, is an act that causes injury or harm. It's a civil wrong or a liability. If someone causes injury or harm to someone, that's called a tort claim. Injury meaning refusal of rights. Somehow or another, someone... So this would typically be something that you would claim against an institution. So if your rights were violated or refused, that's grounds for a tort claim. And harm, so it's injury or harm. The harm part of that is loss of income. So refusal of rights and loss of income, and he had both. So he filed the claim. Now it's interesting, in this state anyway, when you file a tort claim, it requires an affidavit. You have to write out and describe what happened and what your problem is and how much you think you're owed. So the claim is an affidavit that describes how the claimant was harmed and or injured and the amount of money that they're seeking. And so this tort claim must be filed 60 days. There's a waiting period. Once you file it, there's a 60-day waiting period before an actual lawsuit can be filed. So he filed it in April of 2022. Even if he filed it on the last day of April, we're well past the 60-day waiting period at this point. So what was interesting to me is, why did this story show up in the news last week? He hasn't actually filed the lawsuit now. He's filed the claim, but he hasn't filed the lawsuit. He's seeking, though, $25 million for wrongful termination. Remember, he had 3 years left on that contract. So he had about $12 million or about $10 million, I think, left on that contract. Plus, if they wanted to fire him, there was a $3.6 million buyout clause that they should have paid him. As of Tuesday of last week, Rolovich had not filed a lawsuit. He still hasn't. So Washington State University apparently has not made an offer to settle the claim out of court. And since nothing has happened since the tort claim was filed in April, the fact that this story is showing up in the headlines now with no new developments appears to be, now we're just speculating, but it appears to be the result of a press release, either from coach's attorney or from the attorneys for the university in anticipation of an actual suit being filed. So we'll want to keep an eye on this to see how this goes down, if in fact it does go to court. If they settle out of court with him, that'll be interesting. We'll want to hear that, because that's got to start happening. A lot of rights have been violated here. There's a lot of unconstitutional things that have happened here. Now, you might not recognize it immediately in this case. Let's see. But this is another one of those sharp tines in the pitchfork of progressive social doctrine. I call it communitarianism, because that is what the UN is aiming for. So in the tense climate of social justice confusion, the doctrine of corporate governance, known as corporate social responsibility, is an essential area of our society. It's an essential part of the way corporations behave, the way they operate, and treat their customers and their employees, and generally the people in the area where they operate. Corporate social responsibility. But it has been infiltrated. This good cause, this good part of corporate governance has been infiltrated by the wild-eyed, superficial doctrine of DEI, which is also known as diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is specifically relating to our topic tonight. Demoralization. Ideological subversion in America. Because these terms, diversity, equity, and inclusion, all companies, I don't know about all, but it seems like all companies are being required to have a department like this or to meet some government requirements for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, this is new. It's new to us, right? It's new to us, but it's not new to anyone who has experienced living under communism or Marxist-Leninism like the Chinese. But it's a new method here of corporate governance where skin color and especially your ideology are most certainly factors that are used or considered to justify hiring or firing. So, but the problem with that is the laws of the land today still prohibit discrimination based on skin color or religion or ideology. Those laws are still there. They're still there to protect us. So, how do you get around it? Right? When you're the subverter and you're trying to subvert a nation and you run into a problem where there are definite laws there, laws that everyone remembers and recognizes and knows exactly what they mean, how do you get around that? Well, they can't change the laws, not yet. So instead of changing the law, they've gone one better. They've just redefined the language in which the law has been written. You don't change the law, you just change the words so that when someone reads the law, it means something new. Right, so diversity no longer means what you think it means. Variety or range of differences. Now diversity means the opposite. It means uniformity. Uniformity of mind and belief. Ideological uniformity. You have to be faithful to the new religion. Equity no longer means fairness or justice. It now means partiality. It means bias. And inclusion no longer means comprehensive. Now, inclusion, when you hear that word inclusive or inclusion, now it means purging. Purging anyone who does not conform to the doctrines of this New World religion. New World religion of neo-Marxism. In the former Soviet Union, the flagship communist state, a Marxist-Leninist totalitarian dictatorship. A deadly system of authoritarianism, commonly referred to as communism. And control of its citizens was systematic. It was like this. For example, in order to establish authority over a group of people, this was huge. The Soviet Union was huge. So they had to be able to control people at the level of the community. So how did they do that? To establish authority over a group of people at the community level, you need, one, a justification for hiring party members. That's how it worked there. Same thing here. You need a justification for hiring your party members, people that you want in your group. In other words, you want those who are loyal. In Soviet Union, loyal to the party. Here, you want people who are loyal to the new religion. Secondly, you need a stated objective that your company, actually that your hiring department wants to achieve. And thirdly, you have to have a means for removing dissidents. You have to have a way to censor people and get people out of your organization or out of your community who aren't behaving properly, who haven't swallowed the Kool-Aid. That is the doctrine of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is the same doctrine. It is the same setup that you saw, or that was seen and used in the Soviet Union, the same one that is used today in China, for example. That is the doctrine of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And now it's in our, see, it's not being used at the level of the government, not even the local government. It's the corporations that do it. They're the new law. That's what it looks like when it's being played out in America in the 21st century. So a little more about this communism. Just as a definition, it's a system of rule. It's a system of rule. It's a synthesis of Karl Marx's dialectical materialism, synthesized with the anti-capitalist, totalitarian, collectivist ideology developed by Vladimir Lenin, who was the founder and the first dictator of Soviet Russia. And it depends almost completely upon the subversion of truth and the shaping of the public mind or public opinion in order for it to survive. So this anti-human philosophy of, let's be honest, rule by murder, whereas today when you go into these, like the coach there, Rolovich, he just gets fired. In another case, you might not get hired. In the Soviet Union, it was murder. And I don't know if it's going to be that way here anytime soon, but that's the logical conclusion of this doctrine. So I just wanted to bring that up to say this anti-human philosophy of rule by murder is not a relic of bygone eras. Right? This is not a thing the Soviet Union used to do. Today, Marxist-Leninist totalitarian dictatorship is the official ideology of the ruling parties of China, Cuba, Laos, Vietnam, and a couple others that have different versions. And we'll make the case here tonight that this very system of control has caught a foothold in the freest nation the world has ever known. And we have to be aware of it and know how to respond to it. All right, one more story here in our introduction. We've got the Crimes Against Humanity tour. Sounds good, right? Because that's clearly happening around the world. There are crimes against humanity. So, well, it's nice to know that there's a group of people out there who are standing up against it, right? Maybe not. What I want to say to you, I want to warn you that these are popping up all over the place. Beware. Beware of movements that are appealing to the emotions of a public like ours that is largely primed for some kind of major change, perhaps even a revolution. Many of these movements have sprung up recently in the wake of a clearly manifesting global tyranny, and they've sprung up in order to take advantage of otherwise good people who just want to do something to try to stop the march of this mess, to stop the Great Reset, to stop the decline, or to cause the decline, to slow down this encroaching global police state. People that just want to restore their lives to the way it was before 2020. That's who they take advantage of, people like us. People like me, maybe people in your family. So the website here, you can see, you can clearly go on and see who these people are. Now you're not going to see, oh well, this guy's obviously a Marxist and this one. That's not how it is. It's very subtle. But on the website, you can see here on the, there you go. Now listen to the way that they, what they say that they're all about here. I don't think I can get that large enough for you. Just to leave it right there. Under this first heading here, it says, they say, that looks ridiculous. Okay. I'll just give you the header. So it doesn't look so janky. Okay. So, below, what they say is the USA Letters of Indictment campaign has been launched. Indictment. What can you do to help indict the perpetrators of crimes against humanity? That's going to get some people's attention, right? Some people who feel, who are scared, who can see that something's going on and they would really like to do something. So they say you can click the Indict Now button to send your letter of indictment to your state attorney general. Is that going to help? You think that's going to help? One thing that it will do, it will immediately report, your name will immediately show up in a government office stating plainly that you're against the current movement. It might not be the smartest thing to do, to sign on to these random invitations to join these movements, to sign these petitions. May not be a good idea for you to do that. The time has come to stand together as Americans. Millions of people have been injured or killed by this, things I can't say on YouTube, but you know what they're talking about. It is time to inundate state officials with letters demanding that they do their job and protect those they have sworn an oath to protect by convening a grand jury to investigate and indict. Who are you going to indict? Who are you going to indict? You can't indict pharmaceutical industry, the vaccine manufacturers. You can't. They have a special court for that. You can't do it. They're insulated. Now, I'm not saying we don't do anything, but just follow along with me here. They also say, we ask you to join us as we urge attorney generals across the United States to convene a grand jury to investigate the masses of irrefutable evidence of crimes against humanity. The generations before us, now here's the part that's really going to get a lot of people fired up. The generations before us sacrificed and fought so we could enjoy the benefits of a free world. Let's do the same for the generations that come after us. They say, we ask you to join us as we strive to bring criminal indictments against the perpetrators of crimes against humanity. Do it for our children, for our grandchildren, and beyond. The world is waiting for the United States of America to stand up. Right? That's quite a persuasive speech. Here's what they say their mission. Our mission is, we have made significant progress thus far. Right, you might want to ask the question, but who are they? Right? Surely it's a grassroots. This is just some citizens who've gotten together and trying to do the right thing. Right? Isn't that what this is? They say our mission, our goal, which is to lodge the first criminal case that will result in a grand jury being assembled to investigate the vast amount of evidence to indict various individuals responsible for crimes against humanity. Only a criminal case will bring the result we all hope to see, which is the halting of the jab campaign and bringing those involved in the creation of it to justice. We invite you to join us on this journey as we continue the fight, right? It almost sounds like marketing, doesn't it? It almost sounds like they're that good. Well, who is conscious? You see, this what's it called here? The Crimes Against Humanity Tour is sponsored and run by the Conscious Events Global organization, corporation. So here's what it says on their About Us section. It says, we have a passion for people and synchronistic encounters with respected authors and speakers, catalyze life-changing experiences more relevant than ever in the current age of global censorship. We provide a professional platform for extraordinary individuals who inspire change in the world and chart new courses for humanity. We value, did you hear that? We provide a professional platform. Starting to come clear now who they are. We value freedom of expression and the sharing of knowledge. But do they value freedom of expression more or less than they value their income, their bottom line? We consider freedom of speech an integral element of understanding the nature of our existence in a complex universe. We are a privately owned company in the international events industry based in South Africa. They host events and tours in 3 or 4 continents, the USA, Australia, South Africa, and others. They have a range of services from conceptualization, planning, project planning, logistics, venue management, ticketing, marketing campaigns, media campaigns, project management, blah, 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 blah. So that's what they are. They are a promoter. They are a promoter. Their interest here is to make money. Their interest is to enrich themselves off of a circumstance. And I'm not just saying that. I've got, there's some other people out here who were speakers. They were speakers on this. As of June 1st of this year, 2022, Patrick Wood from Technocracy News, and also Judy Mikovits, some of you know her, and Reinhard Fulmish, who is, I think his picture is still on here. Reinhard Fulmish. No, his picture's off. I think also this Dr. Richard Fleming has cut out too. He's no longer a part of it. So why? Why did Patrick Wood and Judy Mikovits? Well, I heard what Judy had to say. Patrick Woods is here. He just says, be advised, because of irreconcilable conflicts of interest recently discovered, we have voluntarily withdrawn from the Crimes Against Humanity tour. Now they say that these 3 remain committed to the message and will continue to work together to get the message out to the world, but they say they regret the significant effort that they put into promoting it, so they're not happy that they promoted it. They found something there that was troublesome. Okay? So specifically, Judy Mikovits said that the issue had to do with their movement supporting some sloppy science and promoting a message of violence towards officials, right? They say on the website, we just want to indict, but on the stages, you see, the thing is, this conscious events group, they're just hiring as many well-known people as they can to come speak and froth up the people. What they want to do is they want to have a movement that is making as much money and creating as much spin as the Reawaken America tour. It's a business. And so they're not vetting the people that come. And so Judy Mikovits said that there were, one of the guys there who was, the science that he was presenting on the stage was just, it wasn't true, it wasn't right. And he was calling for blood. He was calling for people to rise up and take these people out. Bloody. She said, Mikovits and Wood, who are professing Christians, specifically withdrew for that reason and others that had to do with bad reporting on science. So this movement seems to be much like this one we've covered here a few times, the Reawaken America tour. Sponsored by Charisma News, so you can see this is a prosperity gospel type movement. And it's nearly identical in that they're calling for liberation from the encroaching tyranny of corrupt officials. They want to remove mandates. They want to indict leaders. And you've heard, we played it here a couple months ago, you heard some of the speakers there calling for violence, calling for revolution, calling for blood. While both movements also promote a very confused interfaith movement calling for humanity to ascend into its sovereignty, right? And to also take out any individuals or groups who are not on board with their version of enlightenment and revolution. So that could mean us. So you'll find everything from atheist libertarians to New Agers, spiritual gurus, mystics promoting oneness with source energy, religious syncretism, Eastern mysticism, with Gnostic Christian ideas, New Apostolic Reformation, Word Faith, Seven Mountain Mandate Pentecostals, and a whole host of fakes, frauds, and grifters at these movements, or as the speakers in these movements. We've seen these movements gain popularity since the events of 2020. It's a circumstance. They're taking advantage of a circumstance, of an opportunity. So this reminds us of, the past. In 2001, the events of 9/11 were a kind of final straw. A global life-changing event sparked a sense of urgency in people to start investigating reality, to seek to expose lies, to hold corrupt officials accountable, and to seek a response to the evil in the world. It wasn't so much the event itself, we're talking about 9/11. It wasn't so much the event that provoked the movement, it was the fact that a traumatic, life-changing event of global significance that was broadcast on live TV had competing narratives. A lot of people couldn't decide whether A had happened or B had happened or C had happened. It was the hyper-real nature of the events of 9/11, the fact that it was shown on TV, and that what was shown on TV often didn't match up to what the world was actually being told in the mainstream legacy media. After that, trust in the Fourth Estate had already been waning, but trust in the media was almost completely lost. And so trust in government was almost completely lost as well. And as you'll see later, part of the process of demoralizing a nation is getting so that the people don't feel like they can trust anything. At the same time, the internet had arrived, and it was taking the place of television, newspapers, magazines, newsletters, and the actual public square. So now, where newsletters, magazines were typically how people who weren't in the electronic media, that's how you shared information. But now the internet was a barrel of jet fuel sitting quietly awaiting use. And then 9/11 was the spark that ignited this explosion, this sense of urgency in the people everywhere to investigate reality and expose the lies of the establishment. Suddenly, everything was back on the table. JFK assassination, bankers' wars, the Civil War, Vietnam, the moon landing, the shape of the earth, the Freemasons, the Illuminati, national security, fiat currency, central banking, corporations, government cover-ups, terrorism, climate change, vaccines, the Delphi technique, elite bloodlines, UFOs, aliens, angels, demons, the Bible, the pyramids, megalithic structures on Earth, megalithic structures on Mars, the pharmaceutical industry, false flags, the origins of religion. Can we even trust our history? It was all on the table again. The nature of reality itself was placed under the microscope for investigation, and the worldwide truth movement was born. That was 2001. Later, decade or more later, in the years 2012 to 2015, that general area. The truth movement was now in its teens. The truth movement eventually got its driver's license. So then it could move around. It was present in more places in the world. And this is when it exploded on YouTube, 2012, 2015. And the term waking up became synonymous with learning that the world doesn't work the way you thought it did. However, the truth movement was still in its adolescence, and immaturity was a big problem. So as with the years following the global impact of 9/11, today, in the shadow of the events of 2020 and 2021, global lockdowns, and a restructuring of the world order, there is a skepticism of authority and a renewed zeal for liberty, a renewed zeal for religion, or at least a growing curiosity in all things spiritual, put it that way. So now it's 2022. And the truth movement is old enough to buy a pack of smokes, a case of beer, and now the truth movement can sit at the grown-ups table on Thanksgiving. And it's now making a much larger impact in the public square, both in the hyper-real public square and in the physical world. And now trust in the media and government is completely lost. But the zeal for truth has grown stronger. But how is that truth being defined? The truth movement has the same problems that the rest of the world has. Which truth are you zealous for? Yours? Your perception, your standard of truth, or the absolute truth? As the truth movement has come of age, there has been an emergence of a strong religious spirit that's been growing stronger every year. In one sense, this has been a great thing for the church, as we've seen a renewed zeal for sound doctrine in some, but in another, larger sense, this zeal has served to only plunge the world further into darkness. Because these movements capitalize on the attitude of postmodernity, the idea that truth is something that you feel or that you conjure from within. But these movements are gaining traction, and they're taking advantage of the fact that people are hungry for something real, for something of substance. They're movements that claim they're about personal freedom, but there's always a spiritual ingredient mixed up in that emulsion. The mishmash of facts, emotion, and spiritual energy is nothing more than clever, opportunistic marketing intended to enrich a few while it fills the many with false hope. False hopes of salvation and false hopes of revolution. These movements are a dime a dozen. And while they're able to attract some legitimate voices to come and speak at their events, and they'll have useful messages, they also attract opportunists. Opportunists who are driven only by the sensual craving of the flesh and the pretentious confidence in humanity and the pride of materialism. Right? We're going to ascend. We're going to ascend into our higher consciousness, or something like that. These things do not come from the Father. This is of the world. Your adversary, Satan, is the primary underwriter in all of these movements. Their idea of salvation is a global revolution in personal salvation. Autosoterism, self-salvation. Their God is man. In many cases, their God is themselves. James chapter 4, verse 16 says, "As it is, you boast in your proud intentions. All such boasting is evil." Psalm 73:6, "Therefore pride surrounds them like a chain. Violence covers them as a garment. Proverbs 27:20. Sheol and Abaddon are never satisfied, so the eyes of man are never satisfied. So, tonight, we're going to go deep on this narrative, deep into narrative, deep into propaganda, deep into the control of the minds of Americans. Who's doing it? Why are they doing it? What is their exact method? We intend to identify both the cause and the cure. That's what we will do. And if I'm saying we, by we, I mean myself and my lovely wife, who I just want to say, there we go, how's that? Who I miss very much. I just want to make this statement while we're here. She's not in the studio tonight. So in the interest of privacy and protection, I'm not going to say where or what she's doing, but I do want to say you're very much loved and missed. This has been not so much fun here, all solo. So you're loved and you're missed by everyone, all the family, and I especially eagerly await your return. And folks out there, if you don't mind, say a prayer for my lovely wife to have a safe return for my wife, Summer. How about that picture? If you'll notice, I'm a cockroach. I have antennae. Look at that. See that? I have antenna on my head. But I like it. All right. Oh, here we go. We're back to business now. August 12th, last Friday, we said at the top of the show, the FBI and Department of Homeland Security have observed an increase in threats to federal and other law enforcement and government officials following the Trump raid. There was a threat, so-called a threat, to put a dirty bomb in front of the FBI headquarters. That's what they say. And general calls for civil war and armed rebellion. They go on to say that they had multiple articulated threats. I suppose articulated threat means it's a statement of intention where there's a plan in place, I guess. I don't know. Something people could act on. They said that there was mention of violence toward judicial, law enforcement, and government officials associated with the raid, including the federal judge or magistrate who signed the warrant. And the truth is, most of these threats are occurring online. That's the public square now, right? We've established that. Now, to date, the FBI has still not released the affidavit showing the justification for the raid on Trump's home. A lot of people are not happy about that. What we want to do, right, about this guy, look at these two guys. Yeah, this guy looks a little worried. This guy couldn't be happier while he's awake. But what about the narrative? What is it? I caught this the other morning and it just shook me. I was like, wow, this has really ramped up. They are using this opportunity to lock us down more, our speech, our presence on the internet. So at MSNBC, this was Monday morning, early Monday morning, they released these interviews. It says violent comments flood far-right forums following the FBI Mar-a-Lago search. Some people, it's funny when it's a progressive liberal news outlet, they'll call it a search. Fox News will call it a raid, and So, let's listen to a couple minutes of this, and be interested in how what's What's the narrative? How are they treating them?
Social media is absolutely flooded today with threatening posts in the wake of the FBI searching Mar-a-Lago, and it raises real questions about what law enforcement could be facing. Those threatening comments started pouring in within minutes of Donald Trump revealing the FBI was at his home. Online, supporters writing things like, lock and load, when does the shooting start? And they will cry out in authentic pain soon.
How hard would it be? How hard would it be? How hard would it be for an agent provocateur to just flood forums with this kind of stuff, right? That's, come on now.
Soon. NBC's Ben Collins tracks disinformation and extremism and says he hasn't seen violent comments like this.
Ben Collins, who tracks misinformation, he is the specialist for NBC on misinformation, and he's not biased. He's not biased at all. He's objectively reporting.
Since before the January 6th attack on the nation's capital, Ben, as you can see, is here with us. Also with us, Frank Figliuzzi, former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence. So, Ben, you've been reading all this stuff from the moment this news broke all the way through. You're coming out here. What's your big takeaway?
They are ready to go. And by the way, it's the same people who organized this stuff around January 6th. Some of them are literally the people from January 6th. One of those comments that you just saw right there was a man who was at
Can we put those up again?
Yeah.
Can we put those comments up again?
Yeah. So the
Not
next
that, the
screen,
comments,
if possible. Yeah. So one of the comments that was posted last night.
There we go.
Yeah. The second one there, as you can see on the screen.
Right. So don't you know these comments come from those people, the rioters. We'll just have to take your word for that, Ben.
That was posted by a guy who is awaiting sentencing for entering the Capitol.
So he's already pled or been convicted.
He's already pled down, but this might complicate some things here. Because
you don't want to be
his
lawyer right now.
That's correct. As you can see, he posted about how this was, the Civil War. How are we not in a cold Civil War at this point? And he said, by the way, later on, I would say more, but I'm awaiting sentencing. So not particularly bright people, but these are people who are
not particularly bright people, right? So are you really worried? Really worried about these people? Not too many, there's not a lot of action on these two. If you look at the, I don't know, I think this might be on Trump's, they might be, I think they're actually looking at Trump's social media platform. So, that's not going to be an accurate cross-section.
Are ready to fight. These are people who are ready to go, and they've proven it in the past. They proved it, just a year and a half ago. They don't have their leader sending directions and giving specific dates and getting everybody riled up for one big day anymore. That's the big difference. But the level of violence.
But do you
is
have the level of violence? But do you have the volume? In other words, did this serve as a cautionary tale for at least many of them, or most of them, January 6th, and the fact that so many of them are convicted?
There was a time, 3 or 4 months after January 6th, where these people calmed down and they realized that the feds.
These people calmed down. These people are Americans. They're your fellow citizens, Ben. They're just like you, right? One of these days, God forbid, but one of these days, you might be the one who the establishment is disparaging. Anyway, so they're really proud of Ben's reporting, his misinformation reporting here.
But now they don't care. That's the difference. Now they are ready to fight regardless of if they're being watched by the FBI or not.
And January 6th was not a failure of intelligence, but a failure to act on available intelligence. And let's hope that people as talented and astute as Ben is are replicated throughout the FBI, the intelligence community,
please tell me that you think they are.
And major. Yeah, I think they're tuned in.
Let's hope that people as talented as Ben are replicated. How talented has Ben? Well, we've got his Twitter feed up here for you to look at. I mean, some of the stuff here. So he made a tweet, and then he looks like this lady retweeted, and he retweeted his own tweet. So anyway, let's read what he reported. Boston Children's Hospital has warned employees about mounting threats and is coordinating with law enforcement after far-right activists on social media began targeting the hospital. Fair enough. Let's just say they are. What about far left? What about BLM? What about remember the Black Hammer group? Remember that they were like some really young people, and they were stationed out in Colorado and somewhere. But anyway, what about those groups? No, it's just the far right people that we have to worry about. So that's the what was it targeted for? This person asked, and they said the hospital was targeted because they were doing gender reassignment surgeries on children, folks under 18, on children. Interesting. So more of this. It's just extremely biased. This is part of a. This is how the Marxist narrative works. We'll show that. I mean, I'm not just saying that, making that claim in thin air. We're going to support that here in just a minute. So they're mad because Trump is he's campaigning. He's raising funds for his campaign, like everyone who runs does, but they don't want him to. They say here, I have to be careful because YouTube doesn't like this topic. Do you ever consider that the folks behind the idea that the election was, starts with S, rhymes with rolling, of which there isn't any evidence? There isn't? There's no evidence anywhere? There's no evidence of any of that. May have targeted and taken advantage of folks like you for whom a message of patriotism might appeal. So I'm actually making the same claim they are. I'm saying that you got to be careful about these movements who are making, trying to rile you up with patriotism from a different side, of course. Anyway, it's Ben Collins. Let's move on to this, which is a little bit, this one, now it gets to be a little more severe. So listen to this lady. This lady is saying, this is, I don't know, I didn't catch her name. Maybe I'll give her the name here. But this is all about here. This is all about linguistics and narrative. She's saying, stop calling it a civil war because it's extremism. And you might think, well, that's fair. No, it's really not. Because what they actually mean is a civil war has honor attached to it. These dirty monkeys are not, that's how they look at us. These dirty monkeys are certainly not noble. They're just violent extremists. And you'll hear what she attaches it to. Let me.
And professor of history and American studies at Yale University, Dr. Joanne Freeman. Dr. Freeman, good to see you in real life again. It's nice for you to be here. I was alarmed on Monday when so much of this talk went from Donald Trump talking about witch hunt. It moves very quickly into fighting back and even the terminology civil war. And it's not rare. We've had people talking about civil war for the last 5 years. And then we see it move into action. And that's very alarming. There's no point at which Donald Trump or his circle have come out and disowned what happened in Cincinnati. But this person's actions, he tied directly to what happened in Mar-a-Lago and the fact that the FBI was on a witch hunt.
Right. Well, and I have a number of problems with branding whatever's going on right now a civil war. In part, as you're suggesting, it's an escalating phrase, right? So whatever's going on.
It's an escalating phrase. So, as she says here, you shouldn't use that term because it's an escalating phrase. As they sit and use the term, as the media continually uses the term civil war. They are reporting on the forums and how everyone's calling for it. Anyway, let's continue here because she says something in a minute that is.
It suggests something formal. It suggests something structured and organized. And right now, none of that is true, thankfully. But the other reason why I have a problem with that, calling anything that, is because oddly enough, I'm going to say it's comforting, which is going to sound counterintuitive, but in American history, when you say civil war, you think about a specific event. And
a specific event that the Union won. And those, because look, all of this is so obvious. They want to associate everyone that's a Trump supporter, a violent extremist. Of course, they're the South. They're the South. So, and they're the wrong ones. They're the bad ones. Of course, hardly anybody knows exactly what the Civil War was fought over. So It's just a meme today. This far removed from it, it's just a meme that we throw around to try to make our points against our political opponents. But so the Civil War is a noble term. You shouldn't call it that. These people don't deserve that term. But they go on here to talk about the rule of law. Which is interesting.
What is the methodology for solving this?
That's a big question, Ali. I will say there is one thing that kind of comment about FBI brown shirts sort of elides, and that's happening a lot among some people on the right, and that is forgetting about the rule.
Okay, so here's the comment we're talking about. I will support a complete dismantling and elimination of the Democrat brown shirts. Now, that's a reference to brown shirts, the Nazis. They're making reference to Nazis, Democrat brown shirts known as the FBI, the secret police. This is too much for our republic to withstand. Okay, so that's the comment, and she's troublesome, she thinks. As she's calling she's calling 80 million U.S. citizens violent extremists.
Of law. The fact that there are laws that can be violated, the fact that violating them has an impact. You can brown shirt people all you like, but the fact of the matter is, if they're abiding by the law, if they're held to the law, that is a system not only of aggression but a system of restraint.
We have it again. But it's legal, right? What the FBI is doing it's legal, so it's okay. It's moral because it's legal. We've already talked about this. Remember, that's not always the case. Now, is it? Abortion happens to be legal. Is it moral? Should it be happening? No. So what you see here is, again, the idea that, well, as long as there's a law there that allows the FBI to do this, then there's nothing wrong with it. You understand that every person who was put in front of a firing squad in a communist nation or thrown into an oven or whatever was done so according to the law. That was the law. That was the law that they had established so that they could do that.
And right now there's a lot going on among some on the right that is kind of assuming that some people are above the rule of law. And that's not only incorrect, obviously.
Always conjuring, appealing to that rule of law when it's convenient. When it's convenient. Now let's move on to the next clip. This one is the one where it gets to be a little more inflammatory here on the PBS NewsHour.
In response to the FBI search at Mar-a-Lago, some Trump supporters have also increased calls for a civil war. Laura Barón-Lopez takes a deeper look at threats of political violence by elements of the far right.
Those dangerous threats are being fueled by conspiracy theories, as well as the mistrust of the FBI and Justice Department that has been promoted by many Republican politicians. To explain the rising extreme...
I just want you to listen. This is PBS. Now, historically anyway, PBS and NPR have been state-funded. In other words, they should be absolutely objective. They should not play any favorites. They're funded by taxpayer money. I don't know if that's still the case with PBS, but that has been in the past. Public broadcasting service, right? That's what it is. But I want you to listen. There is no objectivity whatsoever here. This is just pure ideology flowing out of what is supposed to be the PBS News Hour, not the PBS Opinion.
Extremism on the right, we're joined by Barbara Walter, professor at University of California at San Diego and author of the book How Civil Wars Start. Barbara, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I want to ask you about the Mar-a-Lago search prompted a lot of Trump supporters to call for civil war. How does this fit into the growing
A lot of Trump supporters, right? She throws out a claim there. It caused a lot. 80 million people voted for the man a couple years ago. So what does she mean by a lot? Does she mean 10 or 15 people? No, she means millions. Millions didn't do that. They didn't do that. This is propaganda. This is massaging the narrative. This is lathering people up. Who's responsible for fomenting the idea of civil war? Right here.
Pattern of extremism on the right.
So for those of us who study violent extremism here in the United States, this is not a surprise at all. If you had been on the chat room starting in 2008, you would have seen an increasing narrative that talked about shifting to a more violent strategy, if more conventional.
Now, she's fairly reasonable here. She obviously, her bias is bleeding through like crazy, but she's pretty straightforward here. But I want to show you this piece here at the 2-minute and 40-second mark, what she says. I'll give you a couple more seconds because I want to look this up. Check this out.
Is illegitimate. If they see it as legitimate, that it has too much power. And the reason they don't want the federal government to have too much power is that federal law overrides state law. And so what we're seeing is an increase in attacks on law enforcement agents and on federal government employees. And so, of course, the gunman in Cincinnati was targeting the FBI, and that's no coincidence. And I'll say one more thing, that there is a book called The Turner Diaries, and it's considered the Bible of the far right. The Turner Diaries outlines exactly how you would persecute, how you would conduct a civil war against the U.S. government. And the very first thing it says that you should do is to attack the FBI.
Speaking of distrust of institutions.
Okay, let's leave it right there. First of all, this is America. There's a constitution there that requires the citizens to keep a well-formed militia. Wow, I shouldn't have said that here on YouTube, that's for sure. But it's our duty to be ready in case somebody takes over. Someone takes over the government. But anyway, what she said there, the Turner Diaries, it is the Bible for far-right extremists. And by far-right extremists, she means the 80 million people who voted for Donald Trump a couple years ago. What is the Turner Diaries? If you don't know, let me explain to you what that is. Well, the ADL has given us a description of it for sure. Author William Pierce, leader of the neo-Nazi National Alliance, published in 1978. The premise of the Turner Diaries is the diaries of Earl Turner, member of an underground white supremacist army, provide an inside account of an Aryan revolution that overturns the United States government in the near future. So it is a fictional book. They say here that the tone of the book is lurid, violent, apocalyptic, misogynistic, racist, and anti-Semitic. Well, of course it is. A notable sequence from the book, Turner's guerrilla unit detonates a homemade bomb at FBI headquarters. What was it again that they said they found in the forums? Oh, yeah. Someone wanted to do that, didn't they? A passage that came to be seen as foreshadowing and as an inspiration to OKC. I can't say this word again here. You know, the guy who did the thing in OKC, Tim McVie. The last time I talked about this stuff, we got a channel smacked on the wrist for a week or so. Just want to be careful. So that's one of the most widely read and cited books on the far right. Has explicitly influenced, among others, the Order, the Aryan Republic Army, the New Order, and that guy again. So they can go on to give more here about it, but it also talks about the birth of the New World Order. Turner Diaries, folks. This is what she said. She said, there's this thing called the Turner Diaries, and these people, this is their Bible. Really? Do you think any of these people know this book exists? I'm sure some do. But this is an old deal. It says in 1991, or 8 B&E, in the book it's known as Before the New Era, American society was in upheaval. Crime rates skyrocketed as roving gangs of blacks and other non-whites rape and pillage nearly at will. Inflation soars. Interesting. And the standard of living drops dramatically. Gasoline is rationed. 2 years before the Cohen Act outlawed private ownership of firearms in the U.S. To enforce the ban, Jewish-run human rights groups employed gangs of, it goes on. So they announced their target. They say that white people are being targeted. If the white nations of the world had not allowed themselves to become subject to the... I probably can't read this on here because the algorithm is going to think that I'm on here. But anyway, it calls for the birth of a new world order, and they're calling for the birth of a new white supremacist world order. Okay? Yeah, that's not what any of us here want, right? That might be a slim segment of people out there, but that's what they want. That's what she says. That's what they want people to believe. Is that anyone who voted for Donald Trump is this person.
The Turner Diaries outlines exactly how you would persecute, how you would conduct a civil war.
Anyway, that thing. Okay, so there's that. So that sets us up for. Well, let me just finish here on this because I just want to make sure it's clear. The reporting here is inflammatory. They're the ones pushing it. They're the ones fomenting it. I haven't heard a word out of any far-right extremist. And I've been looking around. The media, now let's talk about standards. What should be and what shouldn't be. The media should report the news objectively, bipartisanly. It should not engage in exalting or defaming political parties, specific candidates, or elected officials. So this is not the news. An individual, one of us, a citizen, should be able to speak his or her mind as they wish. So whatever it was these people were saying online, they should be allowed to say those things. That's essential in America. We can criticize our government. That is an essential fact, critical element of the expectation of liberty, our rights which are secured in the U.S. Constitution. To be able to criticize the government publicly is essential to government accountability. So, of course, right now, while they have the power, they don't want that. They don't want any accountability. No authoritarian regime welcomes truth. It doesn't welcome accountability. The media in a free society has the solemn responsibility to serve the citizens of the nation and should report the facts and tell the truth. Certainly, the media should be free to report on any newsworthy story, with the exception of matters that truly regard national security. And this has to do with freedom of the press, right? They should be able to ask questions of public officials, and they should be held accountable. But now, we see national security being used as a way for officials to hide their personal intrigues. The government should not abuse the state's, this is the government should not abuse the state's system of security clearance for public officials and its information classification system, which is intended for legitimate matters of national security, of which there are very few. But today there is a mountain of issues and activities that are deeply classified. We live in a national security state. The government should not run operations for personal gain or for party dominance. The government should not abuse these systems that were initially designed to actually protect the citizens from real threats. In this sense, their actions, these folks, are tantamount to treason. And we've seen this going on now for decades. This kind of corruption within the government inevitably results in the creation of a power class. A power class who is in essence above the law. They keep talking about, well, no one's above the law. Come on now. Let's be real. Because they can bury the truth under the cloak of national security, providing the opportunity to operate outside the law for personal and party gain. Once this has been established for so long that it becomes normalized, the individuals and factions within this power class begin to war amongst themselves. They fight for control. They all want control of the levers of power in the system so that they can advance their goals, the goals of the few, at the expense of the people. This is how a historically unique experiment in liberty, like America, can eventually end up under a kind of tyranny that is far worse than a monarchy. It's not an overt tyranny. It's subtle, and it's far worse than a monarchy. And the way this power struggle is fought today is through information and narrative control. They create a hyperreality through narratives and move the pieces around on the chessboard by manipulating the facts and by manipulating the emotions of people, as they've done here. This is how the concept of popular sovereignty is lost. Popular sovereignty simply means that the people rule themselves through representatives. Eventually, the power class convinces the people that it's just too dangerous to continue with this expectation of liberty as it once was. So the ruse of the power class used to be to convince the masses that we're all in danger from an external threat or some kind of invasion or war. Now the game is to convince everyone that our enemy is domestic. It's us. And the danger comes from the extremist that lives next door to you. Threats from factions inside the country. You have to report on your neighbors now. The people become convinced by the manipulation of information and narrative control that they need to exchange their liberties for the security the power class is offering. Ben Franklin said, I think it was Ben Franklin, anyone who would give up his liberties for security deserves to have neither. Okay, now, is it bad? Yeah, these are bad actors. These are bad actors in our society. They have literally conspired to funnel wealth and power in the direction of this power class. I'm speaking mostly about the government now, but this media has been like their army. It's an old game that has now expanded to a global game of grabbing as much power as possible through controlling information, more specifically, controlling opinions and emotions. That's how they move people in the direction they want the world to go. For instance, the very leaders who are compelling or shaming you to identify a man as a woman, or compelling you to get behind Ukraine or whatever it is, or to accept the obvious fallacies of transgenderism as progress. They're all well aware that these things are ridiculous. They know better. But they know that if they move the narrative further and further away from the truth and cause otherwise intelligent people to simply reject self-evident reality, they know they can come back later and convince them to do anything they want them to do. Perhaps even agree that it's best for the planet if we all surrender our privacy, our property, and our personal goals and dreams to live in smart cells within smart cities, and that we should be okay with periodically being restricted, everyone being locked down. That we should be okay with food restrictions, because that is what being safe means. And it's good. It's for the good of the planet. As we covered last week, the United Nations has a new 12-point approach to solve the climate emergency released in September of 2021. The plan is called Our Common Agenda, and it paints a clear picture of the direction in which we are heading, in the direction they would like for us to be heading. So if you want a detailed analysis of that, that's in the last show. What we're going to do now is get right into the main event for tonight's show. In 1970, Yuri Bezmenov, a 31-year-old KGB officer specializing in propaganda, defected to Canada. Bezmenov, who was also known as Thomas Schumann, once he defected, he wanted to assimilate to his new country. Says that Bezmenov was sickened by the oppressive nature and toll of communist totalitarianism and wanted to devote his life to educating Western nations, America in particular, on what he and the KGB had been doing to us to undermine and ultimately destroy our societies. So in 1984, Bezmenov published a book called Love Letter to America, in which he explained in great detail how the communists running the Soviet Union were working to destroy America. Not with bullets, not with physical weapons, but through what he described as cultural subversion. The same year, he delivered a 1-hour video presentation that summarizes his book. And we're going to cover that here. After publishing his book and delivering his presentation in 1984, Bezmenov began teaching international relations at Windsor College in Canada. He died early in the year in 1993. Yuri Bezmenov gave several points on how the Soviet Union would subvert communism into our American culture. The Soviet Union, as he knew it, may be gone now, but the push for communist, Marxist ideologies are still making great headway in America, and all you have to do is look at how our education system has devolved over the past few decades since he gave those exact warnings. So, how to subvert a nation. Now, Bezmenov, he was born in the Soviet Union. He came of age under communism, and he was trained up in propaganda. He was trained up in cultural subversion, specifically through print media. As I said there, he defected in 1980. So our question here is, how is the global narrative controlled? How is it happening? How is it happening? All warfare, as we said recently, all wars today are hyper-real wars. There's something happening on the ground. Somebody's shooting a bullet somewhere. But the real war happens in the hyperreal. It happens on television. It happens on YouTube or the internet or wherever. But that's where the real war is. If you want to know what's happening in the war, you go to the hyperreal to find out. But let's think back into history. How did it start? Right from the earliest opportunities to subvert people. Right, people figured out quickly that it wasn't always the best move to be violent. Especially in Eastern philosophies, the idea of using a stronger opponent's power against him. All warfare is based primarily on deception of an enemy. That's self-evident. But fighting on a battlefield, that's the most primitive way of making war. But there is no art higher than to destroy your enemy without firing a bullet, without a fight, by subverting anything of value in the enemy's country. That's a quote from Sun Tzu, Chinese philosopher, lived about 500 BC, 500 years before Christ. The art of duping the masses into doing things to their own disadvantage and making them believe it's the will of the people is as ancient as mankind itself. The essence of subversion is best expressed in the famous Marxist slogan, "Useful idiots of the world, unite." To achieve the desired effect, the subverter. Now, when we use the term subverter here, we're going to mean that element of the progressive movement that we don't see. People that we don't see. We do see people doing the subversion, but the levers are being pulled, the decisions are being made from somewhere else. Beyond George Soros. Beyond the names like Rockefeller or whatever. They're the ones that you can see. There are others that you've never heard of. They're the ones making these choices. So to achieve the desired effect, the subverter must first make idiots out of normal people, because that will divide them. And then turn those people into a mass of useful and united idiots. No need for tanks and missiles. So Sun Tzu, mentioned a moment ago, he had some, when they found his writings, he had some points for how to take over an enemy's land. An enemy's take over the people. How to subvert, actually, the people. First of all, you cover with ridicule all the valid traditions in your opponent's country. So Sun Tzu, as a philosopher and a military strategist, he's specifically talking about ways, here anyway, alternatives to battles, alternatives to wars, using deception and patience. So first of all, you want to ridicule valid traditions. Now this is how America has been subverted to this point. The reason we're in the state we're in now is because true religion has been subverted. And that's what has weakened America. In fact, the argument you're going to hear me make here is that because we're secular and humanist now, God has been rejected, especially by our lawmakers. America is demoralizing itself. So I'm not going to be pointing the finger at anyone outside our borders. I'm not going to be pointing the finger at our leaders. We're doing it. It's us. We're guilty. Sun Tzu said you need to make sure that you ridicule the leaders of the people. Implicate them so that turn them over to the scorn of their populace. Make their people distrust them. Disrupt the government. Right? Today that might look like endless gridlock with non-essential policies that are being argued about. Utilize the lowest and most despicable individuals in your enemy's country. Yeah. Let them do your bidding for you. Spread disunity and dispute among the citizens. Turn the young against the old. Make sure that you are generous with your promises and rewards to those who collaborate with you. Now, there's a There's an old standard there too that in history, whenever a nation would overtake another nation, or I'm not talking like a nation like the United States, but smaller, when a nation state would overtake another nation state, before the battle started, they needed to spy, right? So what they would do is they would get some of the people who lived in the nation, pay them a lot of money, give them what they wanted, things they wanted, and ask them to go in and spy for them, bring back information. Rewarding them, making them feel good about themselves. And so when they did conquer the nation and they had control, who were the first people to go to the firing squad? It was those people who spied on their own country. And that is because those people who used them know they're not loyal. They cannot be trusted. That's kind of like what our woke mob is doing today. They're kind of like those spies. And so the communist method is same way. Corrupt the young men, get them interested in sex, take them away from religion, make them superficial, make them feeble-minded, divide the people into hostile groups. Clearly, we see that happening. Destroy the people's faith in their national leaders. Subject congressmen, senators, governors, subject them to disgrace and ridicule. Preach democracy, our democracy. This is bad for our democracy, our democracy, our democracy. Without ever defining what you mean by the word democracy. The ones who are preaching democracy are the ones who are seizing the power. Encourage government extravagances. Destroy the credit. Destroy the financial element of the government. Because if you can get a nation into a condition of inflation with rising prices and general discontent, then you have an opportunity to get control of those people. These are just steps in a process. Encourage civil disorder. And when people do, when the ones you want to do it, like BLM and whoever else, go out and start burning the streets, it says, be lenient, have a soft attitude toward that crime. And number 7, a general breakdown in traditional morality. We've seen that. We know exactly how that works. That comes from our universities. So the point here is, how does subversion work to take a nation or a society from an open society where you can choose to work if you want to, not to work if you want to, you have options. How does it go from an open society to a closed society or a dictatorship? The very first step in that process is egalitarianism. Convince the people that you're all equal. Now, we don't mean created equal, because we're all created equal before God, but that convince everyone that they're entitled to the same stuff. Convince them that gender roles are equal. And when you do that, people start to have expectations. God's order isn't designed that way. And so, inevitably, that situation will cause discontent because people are not going to be happy with it for very long. It's not going to feel good. That's not how we're designed to live. And so when that happens, discontent occurs. Immorality, personal truth over objective truth. Immorality is inevitable. And when you have that state in your society, productivity drops severely. And then you get things like inflation and unemployment, a recession, like we have now. That leads to instability. Instability. At that stage is where they want to be very sure to control the information so that people don't actually know what's happening. This leads to radicalism, which leads to power struggle, which we could be seeing that now, which inevitably leads to civil war, revolution. Of course, in Sun Tzu's writings and his method, this revolution would be nonviolent. It would be achieved by deception. It would be a war of emotions, a war of feelings, a war of shame. And so you can get to a dictatorship without ever having a violent revolution, without ever having to fire a shot. Bezmenov wrote this. He said, an open society is the one you're living in now. Now, he wrote this in 1984, right? Things have changed a little bit, but we still have an open society. You can work in it. You can choose not to work. You can have private property. You can have nothing at all. You can love it or leave it. You can criticize it without fear of being declared an enemy of the state. It's a society based on free individual initiative and the free market system. He says, though, as a subverter, all you have to do is upset the status quo of a free nation. And the way you do that is you insert one false idea. Egalitarianism, for example. You tell the people, you get this idea, and you can do this by putting it into, back then, into magazines and newspapers, at the university. Have the coolest people, the ones everyone loves, have the celebrities say these things so that people will buy it. They'll want it. They'll swallow it. Things like, have them say things like, people are born equal, therefore they must be equal. But the truth is, we're not equal. We're not equal in any way, physically, mentally, emotionally, racially, or spiritually. What will happen if equality is legislated? And you make the concept of equality a cornerstone and a pillar of socioeconomical and political system. Well, those people who have gotten used to having things given to them, the ones who don't want to achieve on their own, are going to start requiring more, and they're going to want laws to give it to them. Some who get more for giving less and take advantage of those who are less equal. And when the squabbles for equal redistribution come up between the people, then the state has to intervene. The third party, the third force comes in. The state. Most successful political economic system that's ever existed in the world, created by the fathers of the United States, the framers of the Constitution. That system has nothing to do with legislating or enforcing equality. The American Republic is based on the principle of equal opportunities for unequal and very much different and diverse individuals, giving diverse and different individuals the ability to coexist mutually in beneficial cooperation. Everyone has the same opportunity to achieve. They're not just given the same amount of stuff. This is an entirely different story than what we're being told today. People who have declared themselves to be equal or special will inevitably come to expect more for their individual needs. They'll sooner or later will tragically come to conflict with the unequal reality, which will inevitably happen. And discontent is inevitable. People are less productive. leads to recessions, power struggles, and as we said earlier, eventually to a closed society. You lose your liberty. Borders are closed. Censorship of the media is established, and dissidents, people who talk like us, are executed. That's how it was in the Soviet Union anyway. But here's the point you want to be clear to take away. Any nation is able to do this to itself without any help from the outside. You can easily observe this vicious chain of events simply by reading a newspaper. Well, now nobody reads newspapers, just by keeping up with current events. There are 4 stages of subversion. Here's an interesting slide, though. As we talk about mass formation, how do you get people to move along, to go along with something? Studies suggest that mass formation follows a general distribution. 30% are brainwashed, hypnotized, and indoctrinated by a narrative. 40% are persuaded if no other option seems to be available. And 30% will fight against the narrative. I happen to think that 30% is probably a bit lower. We'll take the word for it. Right. Nothing breeds violence like scarcity. So when you choke off the supply chain, you can move people. Plato's Republic. We've covered this. We've talked about this here a lot. We want one single grand lie which will be believed by everybody, including the rulers. Check this out. Mental health professionals are increasingly recognizing the critical role they play in combating climate change, for example. Data suggests that rising temperatures are linked to increases in multiple psychiatric disorders and suicide rates. So climate change is now a cause of mental disorders. Rising temperatures, huh? You think that's true? You think that's part of this insidious narrative? It's jumping around on me. Hang on here. So these are the 4 stages of subversion. A second chain of events. These are the 4 stages of subversion. I'll just check my messages right quick. Indeed. They are these. 4 stages of subversion are demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization. Now, these occur in an overall sense, a long period of demoralization, a long period of destabilization and crisis. But there are also smaller cycles of these within each one too. In the context of the United States of America, most of these nasty things are done to Americans by Americans. The main principle of ideological subversion is turning a stronger force against itself. Kind of like in the martial arts technique, where you have an attacker coming at you, and you absorb his energy and redirect him in a different way. It's kind of like that. Because think about it, there are too many of us. There's too many of us. If we were a cohesive unit and we all were living according to truth, there would be no way they could move us around like they do. But they do it. They do it because they know how to redirect our energy. We're a larger force, a larger opponent. Think about it in like it's a house. Think subversion. Think about it as a house. A house, and they store a lot of explosives in the basement, just for my story. Now, if one of the neighbors, someone who lives, let's say they live in an RV, and there's someone who lives in a multi-million-dollar home, and they want to destroy that home. But obviously they can't just go up there and light it on fire. They don't want to do that. They want the people in that house to destroy it for them. To destroy this house, the enemy doesn't have to intrude physically into it. It's enough to start a fire next door. And then just be patient. Remember Sun Tzu? Be patient. Make your plan and be patient. Start a fire next door and wait till the wind blows in the right direction. But they'll see the fire and they may put it out. Well, in that case, just give them some good ideas. Give them some things to think about. Distract their attention. Take their attention off of the actual threat. Take their attention off of the fire. Get them thinking about environmental protection. Get them thinking about LGBTQ rights or something like that. Get them thinking about non-critical arguments that divert their attention, or in the larger sense, that divert America's attention away from the real danger as we sit around and argue about transgender rights, what's actually happening in our government. Smart people would notice the fire and remove the flammable objects and materials before the house catches on fire. But useful idiots would just keep arguing about whether it's constitutional to pay firefighters, or should we defund the firefighters or defund the police? Who should remove the flammable chemicals? Should it be the husband or wife? Because we're equal, right? No, until the actual explosion happens and the house is gone. That's kind of how it is in America. While we're arguing about silly things, those people who do have control of the narrative and of the emotions of the nation are very much taking over. So in the first step, demoralization, it involves psychological warfare, or psyops, ideological aggression, propaganda. The KGB back in the day called it active measures. It takes about 15 to 20 years for the process of demoralization to work. And it's a process of demoralizing, subverting religion, education, media, and culture. And then you move into the institutions and the structure. You subvert the law and order. You subvert social relations. Subvert internal politics, and then subvert foreign affairs. And then the demoralization of lifestyle. Demoralize family life by breaking up the family. Subvert the healthcare system. Eventually, it moves on to destabilization, which is where you get to the point of power struggle, subverting the economy. And then you move to the crisis, which is the shortest length of time in any of these four. A crisis could be something like a pandemic. It could be something like any number of things that we probably shouldn't say on the channel here. And then lastly is normalization. All of these things have happened, and by that time you have people that cannot go back to the way they were. In fact, we're only going to talk about demoralization, the step of demoralization today, because demoralization is irreversible. You turn reality upside down. That's how you demoralize a people. Develop and establish consistently enforce a set of double standards. Does it sound familiar to you? Overt and covert propaganda use agents of influence. Today, those are influencers on the internet. Those are politicians. That's media talking heads. Provoke demonstrations and assemblies where you have your own people there. That's the whole George Floyd incident. That was exactly what that was. And the BLM marches and the fires in 2020 in the summer, those are provoked, manipulated demonstrations. Spread rumors. Plant phony stories throughout the media. Create hundreds of tabloid newspapers to keep people focused on celebrities and focused on UFOs. For example, Bigfoot. Get them focused on things that are addictive. And check this out. Other tactics such as sabotage or character assassination of stubborn people, dissidents. One of the main things the Soviet Union did to people who were dissidents in their country was character assassination. That is exactly the same thing we have today. We call it cancel culture. So the first stage of demoralization takes about 15 to 20 years. That is the minimum number of years it takes to educate one generation of students. That's all it takes. That's all it takes to expose a full generation to the ideology that you want to subvert the nation with. In this case, we see it as a form of Marxist-Leninism. I'll call it Communitarianism, of course. So in absence of any cohesive and constant national ideology, see, the first thing to go is religion, a constant, stable set of standards. Is you get rid of that first, and then when there is no stable, cohesive, consistent ideology, the task of the subverter becomes very easy. For instance, you want to make people think that nationalism is bad. Nationalism is the only way that you're going to have liberty. But you convince people that nationalism is bad. Convince them that traditional Christian values are oppressive. And then they've got 100 different ideologies in that land, and they're very easy to take over at that point. The successful demoralization is an irrevocable process. Once it has occurred, it doesn't change, at least for another generation, because it takes 15 to 20 years to educate a generation into one way or the other. And I think we've had this demoralization going on for far longer than that. We've had several generations now, educated public education system, and it doesn't look good for us. Bezmenov gives an example here. Let's see, am I catching up with make sure I've... Right, so in demoralization here, you have 3 levels under this heading of demoralization. You demoralize ideas, demoralize institutions or structures, and then you demoralize the lifestyle, the people's lifestyle. So we're getting to that. But his example here was the crazy 1960s in America. The people who were young people during that time, as he was writing this in 1984, he said, these people who were too preoccupied with protesting the Vietnam War and being involved with the drug rock music scene, taking part in love-ins, etc., they were too busy to study and prepare for assuming their civil responsibilities. Now those people are in power, and they're making the decisions in government, business, media, social life, and entertainment, Hollywood. They're making the decisions for the military, for the intelligence services. People with no moral foundation. You cannot even openly and effectively criticize them because they have invaded the media and they control public opinion. Now, that is a huge point. They are making the decisions and choices for you, whether you like it or not. But how would we restore America? How would we do it? If we could get enough people, how would we do it? To change the direction of America's future and return to the basic American values, proven to be efficient and productive for almost 200 years, or now over 200 years of historically unprecedented freedom and affluence. As I said earlier, what you have to do is educate a new generation of Americans. This time, not in the spirit of progressivism. You educate them in the spirit of patriotism and capitalism with a Christian worldview as its foundation. One bit of good news that we have in our country right now is the homeschool movement. It's stronger than ever. It's stronger than ever. And a lot of people are taking their kids out of public schools. And also the private Christian school movement. Someone and I were recently talking about someone that we know who's taken their child out of public school and put them into a Christian school and is so far really happy about that. The reason for doing that was that the school went woke, went crazy, it just went insane. You can't expose your child to that stuff. So, but even if you start the education of a new generation of Americans right now, it's going to take at least 15 to 20 years to get that generation up to the point where they're able to have power and be in positions of authority. So let's be realistic about that. The demoralization, whether you do it to yourself or whether someone did it to you, this demoralization that we see is usually not reversible. So 3 levels of demoralization. You have ideas, and institutions, and lifestyle. So first of all, here's the most important one that we're going to talk about today. This is primarily why we're in the situation we're in, is because religion. Religion was the first area to be subverted. Scientific knowledge is important, right? That's important. But scientific knowledge, you don't ever see someone willing to die for a scientific truth. You ever hear of anyone who was ready to face a firing squad for the sake of defending 2 + 2 is 4? But faith in the teachings of Jesus Christ throughout history has generated such tremendous moral force in millions of people that people are willingly and they are happy to accept even a violent death and torture rather than to deny their Lord, rather than to deny their belief in Christ. So if the subverter knows that, He knows that he can't use science as the ultimate ideology. He needs a real religion. He needs something that's actually a religion. And here comes Marxist-Leninist dogma. It is a distorted form of faith. When we lose our foundation in the Christian worldview, that we have huge problems. This Marxist-Leninist dogma is free to come in and become the new faith. But it's a distorted form of faith. But it is able to cause people to be martyrs for it, because it is a faith. It is a religion. Substituting the traditional values of the Judeo-Christian heritage with this Marxist satanic faith is one of the basic principles of subversion at the stage of demoralization. The methods are as primitive as they are predictable. It's easy to see this when you have eyes to see and ears to hear. All the subverter has to do is remove the spiritual backbone of America. In order to do that, all somebody has to do is, like you might say, how would you demoralize the religion? How do you subvert the religion? First of all, politicize it. Get the church involved in political debates. Commercialize it. Entertainmentalize it. Preaching moral relativity and removing religion and prayer from schools. Creating personality cults in religion where the preacher becomes the center and the object of divine worship instead of God. That's how you do it. So you see here, there's Umar Hack. We talked about him a few weeks ago. He was writing these articles after Roe v. Wade overturning, saying that America has a theocracy now. You can see it. It's obvious. This guy's a propagandist. He's not telling the truth. He's a liar. The most innocent method for subverting the Christian faith is make it entertaining. A group of rock or pop musicians with a message of social justice, sugar-coated and popular. He wrote this in 1984. Need I remind you? He wrote this in 1984. Subvert the church with a group of rock or pop musicians who have a message of social justice. Coated in popular spiritual tunes can be actually one of the best ways to subvert a religion. It works even better than if someone was to stand in the pulpit and preach a Marxist-Leninist doctrine openly. So, the type of worship, if you have worship teams, the type of music in a church can take it down. Especially if you have those sugar-sweet messages of social equality mixed in with a few doctrines of Christ. You can also commercialize the Christian faith. Religion does the same thing. If the church has to solicit, listen to this, if the church on television or whatever has to solicit people, remind people over and over again to pledge donations, to call in and make pledge donations, then that means there's something very wrong with that faith. And the reason is because faithful people don't have to be asked. They don't have to be asked to support their churches. They do it voluntarily and eagerly. So, to get this to happen, all you have to do is create an unhealthy competition between various mega churches. And that'll do two things. They don't have to be of the highest moral standards. you can. You don't even have to. You don't even have to have a moral guy running the church. It's better if you don't, because when he falls, the truly moral, God-centered people are going to be turned off by this organized religion anyway. Secondly, what this does is it empties out regular churches. So all the subverter has to do now is to keep on discrediting the main body of the church by continuing this narrative that religion is just another means of oppression and exploitation of minorities, or that the church is just about profit, or that the church is simply the opiate of the masses. It's all deception created by the elite. Once you have that established, then you can make those claims all day. And thirdly, you can politicize the church. This is what we see happening right now. We've already seen the entertainment and commercialization of the church. Now it's the politicization. Religion is the most efficient method of demoralizing. Politicizing the religion is the most efficient method of demoralizing the Christian church. Once a nation starts giving to Caesar what belongs to God and getting God involved in such things as social justice and partisan political squabbles, it predictably loses what religion calls mercy and the grace of God. The subverter uses the idea of moral values for dissemination and enforcement of amoral policies. The most powerful instrument of this process is called the World Council on Churches. The World Council on Churches, which was, Yuri Bezmenov, the World Council on Churches, which is infiltrated by the KGB to such an extent that it was hard to distinguish a priest from a spy. Yuri says here, being a public relations officer for Novosti, I accompanied many foreign members of the World Council on Churches during their visits to the USSR. Some of them struck me as individuals who were just pathologically unable to say anything true. Liars. Skillfully combining both God's and Caesar's things, these leaders were extremely effective in bringing the desperately needed air of legitimacy and holiness to these Marxist-Leninist movements. It made the Soviet mass murderers and oppressors, those who hated religion at all, it made them look legitimate. It made them look like they were really doing good works with the church. The result of this demoralization of religion is a phenomenon referred to as the death wish. This expression is borrowed from a book by a Soviet dissident writer, Igor Shafarevich, titled Socialism as a Historical Phenomenon. In analyzing the dead civilizations of Egypt, the Maya, Mohenjo-Daro, Babylon, etc., he came to an ominous conclusion. Every one of these civilizations died when the people rejected God. When they tried to create a new social justice order, they died. He posited that this looks like it may be a manifestation of an inborn human instinct to self-destruct. We would agree. We would just call that the sin nature, right? So that is correct there. So in that sense, we need a correct anthropology of humanity. To know how to combat this, we have to come from truth, the position of truth. If anyone remembers back in 1966 in April, 50 years ago, This question landed like a bombshell on the cover of Time magazine. Is God dead? In truth, the death of God theology had debuted many decades prior, no doubt because of this infiltration. And atheism had been around for a while too. It was no new phenomenon in the West, but in April 1966, coverage of this trend made the conversation a public one. It was change in Protestant doctrine through the work of theologians, liberal theologians, that made the broader conversation possible. One theologian inspired a new liturgy for this age of marking God's death, rewriting Psalm 23 to say He was our guide and our stay. He walked with us beside still waters. He was our help in ages past. He is gone. Stolen by darkness, heaven is empty. These are theologians. Do you think they were subverters on the payroll? Apparently, the so-called death of God necessitated the rewriting of this beloved Psalm 23. The revisionism advanced primarily on college and university campuses as students reared in religious homes in many cases walked into classrooms aimed at deconstructing their spiritual formation. In time, through such pedagogy, it became not only possible but even fashionable to identify as an atheist, or at the very least as a skeptic, a rational thinker. 2019, a new question has emerged in the West. Is man dead? Is man dead? Over the last 50 years, Western society has re-envisioned the human person. For millennia, humanity was understood in the light of God. Mankind was made in the image of God, and thus humans had certain duties before God and were fundamentally spiritual beings. But with the rise of the death of God theology and the death cult that we're surrounded by, mankind is no longer seen as a creation of God. The prevailing view in critical circles today is that mankind is a blank slate, evolved from eons of old combustions of gases. Humanity has no divine origin. We're an accident. No creative figure guided the human race's formation or shaped the human person's identity. Chaos and randomness obviously account for the order. You see how that makes no sense? To say the universe is random, yet everything you see has order. The human race is not even really distinct from the beasts. We're a higher animal, nothing more. We have no greater story, no telos or purpose, no ordained end to which we are traveling. Atoms collide, and so does mankind. This was a group of radical Protestant thinkers. They say that the word God is meaningless. How did that happen? How did Protestant theologians get to that? They question whether God ever existed, because he no longer speaks to man, they say. True Christianity, they say, is an affirmation of the secular world in the style of the man, Jesus, and has no relation to traditional churches' practices, such as the worship, the sacraments, and prayer. But what's interesting about this is this death of God theology made the feminist theology of the 1970s possible. If not convincing as theology, because it removed the masculine aggressive principle from the Christian drama of redemption. Suddenly being a man means nothing. We're all animals. Here are 14 modern humanistic mantras that have come up out of this infiltration, this subversion we have experienced. I am capable. I know who I am, and I am enough. Now, this sounds like posters you'll see on the wall at your dentist's office. Actually, here at this building, there's lots of those out in the hall. You know, motivational posters. I choose to be present in all that I do. I choose to think thoughts that serve me well. I choose to reach for a better feeling. I share my happiness with those around me. My body is my vehicle in life. I choose to fill it with goodness. How's that working out for you? I feel energetic and alive. My life is unfolding beautifully. I am confident. I always observe before reacting. I know with time and effort I can achieve. I love challenges and what I learn from overcoming them. Each step is taking me to where I want to be. Where I want to be. Each step is taking me to where I want to be. Where I want to be. I got something I can read for you here. To where I want to be. Isaiah 14, verse 12. How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. This is talking about Lucifer. How you are cut down to the ground. You who laid the nations low, you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Isaiah 14, that's Ezekiel 28. Also, speaking specifically about the Prince of Tyre here, it's also about Lucifer. Thus says the Lord God, because your heart is proud and you have said, I am a God, I sit in the seat of gods, in the heart of the seas, yet you are a man and no God. Though you make your heart like the heart of a God, because you make your heart like the heart of a God. Now listen to what the Lord says here. And think about the judgment of a nation. Because you make your heart like the heart of a God, therefore, behold, I will bring foreigners upon you, the most ruthless of the nations, and they shall draw their swords against the beauty of your wisdom and defile your splendor. They shall thrust you down into the pit, and you shall die the death of the slain in the heart of the seas. Will you still say, I am a God, in the presence of those who kill you, though you are just a man and no God, in the hands of those who slay you? You shall die the death of the uncircumcised by the hand of the foreigners, for I have spoken, declares the Lord. The Christian doctrine of humanity starts from an opposite perspective. It's not that believers reject any sense of agency or volition of self-discovery. Christians know that we may only know ourselves if God has enabled us to know ourselves. In other words, a good deal of information that we need in order to know who we are does not come from any attempt to dig into our truest selves, but rather from studying the will of God for His special creation, both natural and supernatural. If we wish to know ourselves, then we must look beyond ourselves. John Calvin said, "No man can survey himself without forthwith turning his thoughts toward the God in whom he lives and moves, because it is perfectly obvious." He says, "It is perfectly obvious that the endowments which we possess cannot possibly be from ourselves. We are no creators. No, our very being is nothing else than subsistence in God alone. The witness of Scripture and of the church that loves the Scripture is not that the knowledge of God helps in our formations of self-knowledge. The witness of the Scripture is that we cannot know ourselves without knowing God." Carl F. H. Henry concurs with John Calvin. He says, quote, "Divine revelation is the starting point of all human knowledge. To know God and His intentions for humanity, we must start where the Scripture starts. Genesis 1, right? You don't skip the creation account. You have to start where the Bible starts. Many Christians derive their doctrine of origins from this chapter, the landmark text. However, offers not simply knowledge of God's creative work, but knowledge of God's design of humanity. As we, this he's going to in this text, but I'm going to share something else about a true anthropology. The Christian vision of humanity is exalted. Never is the value of the human race more obvious than when we take stock of biblical anthropology. The theology, the anthropology actually, of transhumanism, posthumanism, of this movement today says that mankind is a scourge on the earth and that the planet needs to be saved. Biblical anthropology says that man, those who believe in Christ, will be saved, and that the earth is there for man to subdue. The earth is there to serve us. This recovery of the enchanting of humanity, this enchantment begins with the concept of the Imago Dei, the image of God, a true idea that is unsurpassed as a force for dignity and value. The Christian worldview is the only worldview that provides a context for man having any true value, worth, or dignity. Christianity does not speak of only one side of mankind, affirming it as without blemishing or failing. We don't just look at the positive. We don't just look at the good parts. There aren't that many. We build out a comprehensive doctrine of the human person from all of Scripture and thus all of theology. This means that we must simultaneously savor the significance of man as the image of God, even as we square with the sordid sorrowfulness of our personal depravity. Both are true. We cannot leave our terrible state by positivity alone. We must know the truth about ourselves. If we would rise from the ashes and save our civilization, then we must know why we're here, who we are. We have to know why we are so innately sinful and selfish, and thus position ourselves to marvel at the mercy of God in Christ. Let's look here at Ephesians chapter 4 as we make our way. Ephesians 4, verse 14. This is the chapter with the famous put off, put on verses. This is how you deal with your sin. You identify the sin, find a biblical word or language that describes your trouble or your problem. Find out what the Scripture says about it. Find out what God has said about it. And put that thing off. And then put on what God has said about it. Ephesians 4:14. As a result, we are no longer to be children tossed here and there by waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, by craftiness and deceitful scheming. But here's our duty. Here's our duty in the world, folks. Verse 15. But speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in all aspects into Him who is the head, even Christ. Therefore, laying aside falsehood, speak truth, each one of you, with your neighbor, because we are members of one another. We want to finish this strong for you, folks. The believer shows real gratitude for technological process. You know, sometimes people will accuse Christians of hating technology or being afraid of it. No, we're afraid when people who have no grounding in morality are trying to use technology for wicked things. We have no quarrel with science. Let me show you this other. Right? Where all of this leads inevitably, if we allow it to happen, is more of this. Right? One world religion. No truth. It's just these religions have nothing in common, but there they are. Conversion therapy is looked at as though it's some kind of violent activity. Going to persecute us, folks. They're going to persecute us. Pedophilia is now just, more and more just being accepted as just some kind of, it's just a sexual orientation. You know what? We need to get used to that, they say. It's just an orientation. It's just like being straight or gay, right? That's what they say. The Pope says that we have to repent for our abuse of Mother Earth. This is all narrative, folks. This is all the narrative coming from this Marxist-Leninist type movement. I'll keep calling it Communitarianism movement. Churches being paid to push the vaccination off on their people. We covered this here. Giving people money. Given the churches in Pennsylvania, I think it was $600,000 to do a vaccination plan. Leads to doctrines like this, moralistic therapeutic deism. It's not God. It's just the idea of God that people prefer, that man's wicked heart prefers. It's just a general God who's there, and we only call on him when we need something. He's there to resolve our problems. Right? It says that the whole goal of life is for us to be happy and feel good about ourselves. And that anybody who's good goes to heaven when they die. That's the kind of God that the state is happy for you to affirm. Because that one's not real. Education system. The education system, folks, has been subverted as well. Mass education, concept of education emphasizes environment, mass character education over individual abilities. Political conformity is taught, ideological brainwashing, lack of individual initiative. Most of the scientific and technological research that comes out of these universities now is really only about pushing forward the goals of the state, militarily, vaccine research. That's victorious science. American romance with state-run education as encouraged by subverters has already produced generations of graduates who cannot spell, cannot find Nicaragua on a world map, and cannot think creatively and independently. The eventual result is very predictable. Ignorance combined with anti-Americanism. And you can see that right here. This is what it looks like, folks. This is the evolution of in our society going from a nation founded on a Christian worldview to now one that rejects God. Over here on the left, you see the original seal for Harvard University. You see that, right? Christ and the church. Truth, veritas, truth is Christ and the church. Which has now been reduced, been changed to a nice Roman crown wreath. And just the word veritas. Truth in what? This seal on the left means truth in Christ. Carried on by the church. This one on the right, the current seal of Harvard, just says truth. It's just truth. On the left, these are Bibles, right? Christ and the church. And the church protects the Scripture. The church shepherds the Scripture along. That's how God has chosen to preserve the Scriptures. Over here, this is just 3 random books. Truth is relative. H.L. Mencken said it this way, the whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, all of which are imaginary. Right? Yeah. That's a little bit about public education, more about censorship. You can see how the censorship works. Little army of unarmed, violent extremists almost riot at Idaho Pride event. They almost rioted. That's what the media puts out for us today. Yeah. There he is, Volodymyr Zelensky. That's what the media does for us. Zbigniew Brzezinski in his book, Between Two Ages, reading this one right now. I want to see what he says. The technotronic era, he's talking about the era of where the world is connected, and this was 1978, so he was aware of some computer technology, but mostly it was phones and that type of communication, some satellite communication. He says he could see this coming. The technotronic era involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Such a society would be dominated by an elite, unrestrained by traditional values. Soon it will be possible to assert almost continuous surveillance over every citizen and maintain up-to-date, complete files containing even the most personal information about the citizen. These files will be subject to the instantaneous retrieval by the authorities. He was right. In the technotronic society, the trend would seem to be towards the aggregation of the individual support of millions of uncoordinated citizens easily within the reach of magnetic and attractive personalities, celebrities moving the masses, exploiting the latest communications techniques to manipulate emotions and control reason. One of the ways that they do this, folks, is while they're running the show with the serious issues, they give us non-essential topics to argue about. Like Mandela effect. Did the little banker have his monocle or not? Did he? Berenstain Bears? Is the earth flat? Who cares? Who cares? They're taking the land away from us. They're subverting our neighbors and turning them into people who don't know the difference between a man and a woman. We can't sit by and let this happen, folks. Right? Issues like climate emergency, false issues even. They keep us entertained as well, right? They give us these celebrities. Listen to this. Here's an article from 1959, written by Canadian writer Gregory Clark in the Toronto Star. It says this: 1959, if I were a communist agent in America with millions of dollars to spend annually, I would not waste it in bribing public servants to give away state secrets, but I would lavish and encourage the sleazy tunesmiths of that region to turn out more and more garbage culture. Gaggle-headed and obscure musicians would be helped to prominence. I would seek out the more questionable publishers of the dirtier paperbacks and slip them a few $100,000 so they could set up more respectable head offices. Wherever trend shows towards the beat generation or the artists of the day, I would offer it a helping hand. Anything that prompted the insubordination of teenagers, anything that contributes to the confusion, exasperation of parents, I would fund liberally. The basic intention of my spending would be to break down discipline, encourage relaxation of authority of every kind so as to build up in as short a time as possible an adult generation that could very easily go out of control. America would look desperately around for any kind of discipline to rescue them. They would eventually get tired of this and start looking for someone to save them. They would start looking for some real discipline. And just pretty as a picture, there would be communism, or today, wokeism, or the progressive movement, the globalism. There it would be, with its iron-fisted discipline, waiting, and the victory would be bloodless. That was written in 1959. There's not much we can add to that. Demoralize America through mass culture by relying upon the help of useful idiots of entertainment business. No, these artists you're looking at are not on the payroll of any organization or elite. They're on our payroll. We pay them because we've been trained to do it. All the subverter had to do was to slowly and gradually change our attitudes and kill our resistance to the demoralizing addiction that we as kids all called music. It wasn't. It wasn't. I know I loved it then, and there's a part of me that still does, but it wasn't music. It was a demoralizing addiction I had, and you all know it. You all know it's true. Make it acceptable, normal. Make it a part of American culture. Make it a part of American culture in a place where it never even belonged in the first place. This is acceptable and popular today. And you know why it is? Because we played our role in allowing it to happen. We indulged in it also. The second level of subversion is structures, institutions. You can see, of course, we've got, here's one, right? Train people up in these movements. Say their names. It's a religious movement. Look at them kneeling. Right? They're doing it. They're doing it. And, of course, the subversion of health, body, and mind. Yeah, this is one that'll really get your, this really grind your gears here. Similar methods are being used in the area of medical and health services. Similar myths have been promoted in the past. Similar myths of free health care. Yet the tendency of U.S. bureaucrats is to enlarge the state-run Medicare, despite the fact that as socialized medicine is substandard, less efficient, and most definitely less progressive than privately owned and operated medical facilities within a properly functioning free market system. But we have begged for it. We have pleaded, please, please, please give us the free stuff. Demoralization in the area of food. Look at that. Look how many, these few corporations control all the food you find in the grocery store. Well, most of it anyway. They look at consumers as units as just units, not individuals, abolishing freely competing small food companies for them to survive, they had to treat the customer well and provide a good product that didn't cost a lot. But these giants of indigestion artificially create consumers. They train us to like what they make. They train our taste buds to like the garbage they produce. They train our tastes and demands, which are not in the interest of our health, but surely in the interest of this monopoly. Pretty soon, food production for the country will be done in 4 or 5 regions, and that'll make it very easy to make sure everyone gets the same amount of stuff. Demoralizing the health care, telling women today that abortion is health care, while hiding this big number from everyone. That number is a little bit low. That's higher this year, closer to 900,000. But the gun-related deaths we need to be worried about, while never calling any attention to those abortions. 42.6 million abortions worldwide in 2020. But all the news went to the COVID deaths. No one cared about the genocide that's happening all through the world. Specifically, in the United States, whenever a black woman gets pregnant in the United States, 40% of the time almost it turns out in an abortion. And that is because they are heavily marketed to by Planned Parenthood. But we need to have access to this health care, because what if the mother's in danger? What if it's rape? What if it's that? Well, okay, those things are allowed for. They're a very tiny percentage of what actually happens. Is abortion for convenience is 92%. More than that, it's 98%. Where there's a fetal abnormality or some kind of actual health problem where the mother or the child are in danger, is far less. And the vaccine agenda, they control our lives with that. Everyone's following the science today. They're following the science. We follow the science. Social theories. This would be good advice. Population redistribution. Alienating people from one another, atomizing us to death. Making us choose between our livelihoods and loyalty to their system of control. It's a moral thing. We're doing it because it's a moral thing. As you see in healthcare now, we have Soma. Soma is on the scene now. It is now out there. Ketamine is now an approved therapy for depression. Yeah. And they like to act like this drug doesn't have side effects. It won't cause any problems for the person. Folks, that's just not true. This is a way to experiment on the population to find out what compounds they can use to keep us as subdued and as unaware that they're taking us over for as long as possible. Sustainable Development Goals, the twisted gospel of climate change. You are sinning against the planet. You got to repent of your freedom and let science save you as we build our heavenly utopia. Very interesting piece here. Summer found this piece. This is a good one. The task of climate change agencies is not to persuade by rational argument, but in effect to develop and nurture a new common sense. To develop a new common sense. We need to work in a more shrewd and contemporary way using subtle techniques of engagement. The facts need to be treated as being so taken for the facts, not the truth, but the facts need to be so taken for granted that they need not be spoken in amounts to treating climate-friendly activity as a brand that can be sold. This is, we believe, the route to mass behavior changes. This from the Institute for Public Policy Research. Yeah, there you go. Of course, the mass drug use agenda that doesn't get quite enough ink and airtime these days. And of course, this worldview would lead you to believe that addiction is a brain disease. Right? Lead you to believe that a choice you make to pick up and do something, well, that's just a brain disease. And of course, this worldview will lead you to accept something like this as a heartwarming story of love, when all it is just blatant, ugly, disgusting eugenics. Right? Where are the screeching woke mobs on this white supremacist movement right here? How about this? This is the person in our government now that is in charge of making sure that people get health care they need. Calling for laws to support and empower youth so that they can get their gender affirmation treatment and their surgeries. Yeah, well, most of us together here tonight are guilty of this. We're guilty of wrong think. And how wonderful that our society has been turned so inside out that we don't even know how to address human beings. We don't even know how to address one another anymore. We don't know what to call people. So today we have to walk around with cards because we're so important that we need people to realize, I have different pronouns. I would like for you to, come on. This is obviously a subversion happening on our people. All of these silly pronouns, this is nonsense, people. This is another example of what it looks like when the mind of the nation has been subverted. You see, it's okay to sexually objectify the children and just put them right out on mainstream entertainment. No problem. No problem at all. These two gentlemen have written extensively over the past few years on this topic. Rod Dreher on the left, Live Not by Lies. Carl Trueman on the right, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. He's written some other books about this as well. I recommend you look up these writers and read their books if you want to understand what's happening and what the remedy is, how we respond. Expressive individualism is the common personal perspective today. Follow your heart. Be true to yourself. Live according to your own truth. You be you. A strong desire to express and fully assert who you feel you are. You feel it's right for you, so express that to the world and insist that they agree with you, or you'll punish them, or you'll have them arrested. Defining one's personal identity as an essential right and the foundation of liberty, that the pride in self-creation is the foundation of reality and a basic human right now too. These two ideas Mimesis is, these are basically worldviews. Two competing worldviews at the moment. Mimesis is the idea, the worldview that the world has given order. The world has a meaning. Human beings have a purpose and a meaning. And we conform ourselves to the design of creation. Right? I was born a male, so I conform my mind to that reality, and I live within creation as a male, as a man, because that's how God created me. However, today, because of subversion, ideological subversion into our universities and our science, institution of science, poesis. The social theorists have caused this. This worldview sees the world as raw material, sees the body as raw material, as a substance that the individual manipulates and changes to create his own purpose and meaning. Right? That is almost a self-evident truth in the secular culture today. Of course, communitarianism is what I believe we're looking at. I wouldn't call it Marxist-Leninism, even though that is the format. There's a new sheriff in town, and it's called communitarianism, where the community gets rights, but individuals don't. We've talked about that a lot here. And, of course, finally, our common agenda we talked about last week. Specifically, this 7th point, where we read that a global code of conduct is going to be required in that the United Nations in their common agenda. Building trust, that is the ministry of truth. Have to make lying wrong again, they say. Lying. You have to have a truth before you can call something a lie. They've determined what the truth is for themselves. It requires a global code of conduct to promote integrity in public information. Simply establishing a ministry of truth. Anybody who disagrees with this will be labeled a deviant, will be denied access to financial services, to society. That this information will be curated and wrangled by United Nations trained change agents. They will regulate social media. They will have forms of information and versions of truth that they will call sacred. Rockefeller Family Supported Town Hall was held at the Columbia School of Journalism in 2019 with the objective of changing how the media does reporting. And they did it. There was a wide agreement that the very basis for the public's trust in journalism, which is the expectation that the media will be neutral, will be objective, they said that needs to be abandoned in order to save the planet. Of course. And 220 global media outlets participated and took that message forward. Censorship is everywhere. They call it a conspiracy theory. If you happen to question any part of their narrative, you question it with good science, self-evident truth, they don't care. In fact, conspiracy theories are now a mental health crisis. Right? This means that if you don't go along with the narrative, you're mentally ill. It's just that simple. Right? If you think that somehow or another the jabs have caused any harm, you're mentally ill. You just are. You're just flat out. Inclusive language. We talked about that right at the top of the show, about what it means now when they say inclusive. All that means, folks, when they use the word inclusive, that means purges. That's what it meant in the Soviet Union. That's what it means now. Inclusion doesn't mean comprehensive anymore. It means purging anyone who does not conform to the doctrines of the New World Religion. Here's a new idea, sympathy versus empathy. This word on the left is a new word. Sympathy's always been a fine word. Very quickly, I'll give you an image for it. Sympathy is when we grieve with someone, we understand someone's plight and their trouble, but we don't jump in and try to experience it with them because we don't know what it feels like to be where they are. Someone who's lost a child, perhaps. Oh, I can empathize with it. No, you can't unless you have lost a child. You don't know, and you can't pretend to do it. To pretend to do that is dishonest. It's a disservice. It's not humane. But sympathy. The difference is this. Someone who is sympathetic sees someone drowning in the river, and they keep their foot on the bank and their hand on a tree limb and reach in and grab the person and pull them out. That's sympathy. That is being sympathetic. Empathy, according to the world today, this Marxist-Leninism, this wokeness, this movement. Empathy today, what that means is, no, you have to jump in the river yourself, whole hog, just go right in and drown with the person. You see how silly and ridiculous that is. This worldview is founded on something known as dialectical materialism. As I said earlier, communism essentially was the mixture of Marxist dialectical materialism and Leninist collectivist ideology. Matter and energy, that is truth. Class struggle drives all of human history, and economics is a means of controlling people. Of course, Marx was a disciple of Hegel, so the dialectic. We see history changing according to thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, and also this process can be used as a means to change people actively. Neo-Marxism dehumanizes people. It's an anti-human movement. It demoralizes all relationships. It decivilizes all institutions. Traditional ideas of civilization go on the ash heap of history. Language is weaponized. Truth is what everyone wants it to be. Plain speaking must bow to political correctness. Utilitarian philosopher John Stuart Mill had an astute saying, all silencing of discussion is an assumption of infallibility. So when anyone is trying to shut down all debate and communication, they are claiming for themselves to be godlike. This is just about meta-narrative and worldview. About God. It's impossible for God not to exist. So to help us now, as we finish it up tonight, how do we defend? We've learned plainly that it was the subversion of true religion that put us in this position. So it will be the gospel, the true gospel being preached, being shared. That is what? That is the only thing that will restore, that will save our civilization. So we need to learn ways to counter these silly claims that people make. God doesn't exist. You're crazy. He couldn't possibly be. Well, you can respond with this. In fact, my friend, it's impossible for God not to exist. Something called the impossibility of the contrary. If chance exists in any size, shape, or form, God cannot exist. The two are mutually exclusive. If chance existed, it would destroy God's sovereignty. If chance is, God is not. If God is, chance is not. And we already know, logically, following the laws of logic, that the universe cannot be random. It cannot be eternal, and it cannot be chance. So there's an argument for the existence of God. James White said recently, we have great challenges before us, my friends. Great challenges. But we have a greater God, so let us press forward in faith. We are ambassadors. We represent Christ in this world, and we need to remember that when we're in this world, when we're going about our business. I need to remember this. In everything that I do, I need to remember it when I'm on here talking to you. I need to remember that when I'm at the store buying cases of water left and right, which I love to do. I do. Buying coconut water. I need to be representing Christ at all times. Even with these people who are clearly destroying the nation. We're not showing anger. Ephesians 4, we speak the truth in love. We are ambassadors. 2 Corinthians 5, therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, as though God were actually making his appeal to the world through us. That's what he's doing. Paul says to this Corinth church he loves so much, he says, we beg you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. He made him who knew no sin to be sin on our behalf so that we might become the righteousness of God in him. We are his ambassadors. It would have been just if the Lord had just destroyed us all. That would have been just. If he'd have thrown us in hell for 500 years, that would have been just. But he didn't do that. He redeemed us. He redeemed us to eternal life with himself. And not only that, he made us ambassadors. He made us his representatives here in the world. He filled us with his Spirit, warned us that we would be persecuted, but that his Spirit would be in us and protect us, and that we would never suffer anything that we can't endure. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Read a little bit of this for you as we finish it up tonight. I appreciate you all hanging out with us and going through this longest show in the middle of the night. We have no quarrel with science. We know many of the greatest scientists in human history were people of faith. But we do differ with scientism, plainly. Scientism is the view that science alone, without the assistance from other worldviews or definitive text, furnishes us with all the truth we need to make sense of the world. Science, material, can do that. The believer, you and I as believers, we're skeptics. We are God-trusting skeptics. It means we are skeptical of the claims and the presuppositions and the branding of science offered to us by fallen people from fallen institutions, because we know that all truth is God's truth. And so wherever we find truth, whenever we can find something that is true, we affirm that truth. But we do not affirm that all worldviews are correct or that all ideas are equal, because they are not. We live in the day and age of where transhumanism and posthumanism are gaining traction. At its core, posthumanism is the rejection of the humanist tradition of the West, of human exceptionalism. then that humans are really not all that important. Much of this has its origin in the academic liberation movements of the 60s and 70s, especially feminism, post-colonialism, and queer theory, which first began to challenge traditional Western male understandings of what constitutes humanity. Posthumanism takes the next step and treats the human no different from any other life form or non-life form. Posthumanism calls for a more inclusive definition of humanity, even life itself. As such, a central concern of posthumanism is the diffusion of human rights to non-human subjects, such as animals. Animals have rights now. The ecosystem the planet has rights now. And even inorganic entities such as machines, computer code, AI will have rights. Posthumanists do not view humanity as the special creation of the Almighty God. Rather, they identify consciousness or mind in all things and thus humanize them. According to mathematician and science fiction novelist Rudy Rucker, he says, stars, hills, chairs, rocks, scraps of paper, flakes of skin, molecules, all of them possess the same inner glow as a human. Each of them has a singular inner experience and sensation. Unquote. There is no distinction in posthumanism between God and the world, mind, and matter. All things are smart matter. The posthumanist views the merging of technology and humanity as a positive outcome toward which society is headed. Ultimately, what they're saying is this: someday, human people will not be needed. Posthumanism is anti-human and nihilistic at its core. Transhumanism, an ideology that promotes striving for immortality through technology, seeks to improve human intelligence, physical strength, and the five senses through technological means, marries with the call to control the world's climate, the reimagining of humanity. In these doctrines, folks, this is the main thing you need to understand about those who seem to have the power right now. In their minds, this is why they're dangerous. In their minds, humanity is seen not as the steward of the earth, but as the scourge of the earth. Despite the fact that human lifespan has shot upward since the Industrial Revolution, global poverty rates are at an all-time low right now. Have you heard this in the news recently? Have you heard in the news recently that things are actually getting better in the world? Not if you're reading the news. You're not hearing that. Lifespan has increased. Poverty's at an all-time low. Everyone's standard of living has never been higher. Even though that's all true, transhumanists argue that humanity must undergo genetic remaking to save the planet. Advocates of transhumanism who approach humanity as a problem to be solved, and they view the earth as the property to be saved. To paraphrase Owen Strachan, I've just been sharing with you from his book titled, let me show you this book. This is a good book. This is a biblical anthropology re-enchanting humanity. Theology of Mankind. This is Owen Strachan. Theologian, professor, a young one. and a great one. And you'll want to look him up on YouTube. The Christian worldview does not start with blind randomness. Let me say it again. The Christian worldview does not start with blind randomness. Our worldview starts with a personal, living, infinite God. And that God is Creator. The opening chapters of the Bible, Genesis 1:1, is where we start. We own those. And we own them proudly. We own the creation account, and we're proud of that. That is the foundation of everything. If you get that wrong, if you get the foundation, why this planet is here, why anything is here, why matter is here in the first place, if you get that wrong, if you get it wrong, how we've been created, and somehow you're, even as a Christian, you're convinced that God did it through some type of evolution, that He just chose a couple hominids and He gave them souls, and that's who Adam and Eve is. There's no biblical support for anything like that. There's no reason, no evidence to support that that's the case. We believe the Bible from front to back, because that is the foundation of all reality. That tells us who we are, why we're here, where we're headed. Without that, you're going to run into errors. You're going to have a complete and incomplete and flawed worldview. Often critics, sometimes Christians, will assert that the Bible is a purely spiritual book meant to guide the heart. Now, obviously, that's true. However, Scripture is saturated with the highest philosophy, and it trains one to think logically. Isaiah 1:18 says, "Come and let us reason together, says the Lord." The second half of the first chapter of the Apostle Paul's letter to the Christian church in Rome, verses 18 through 32, written in about the year AD 57. Those verses, from 18 through 32 and on, those verses track right along. They track right along with the essential elements of a worldview founded in truth. This is what they do. We're talking about Romans 1, starting at chapter 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who, by their unrighteousness, suppress the truth. Because what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. Because His invisible attributes, namely His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world. How? Well, in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. Although they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks to Him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, exchanged the glory of the immortal God for idols. For idols. Therefore God gave them up to the lusts of their bodies, to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind. They cannot think clearly. They become gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. They know God's righteous decree. They know it. They just suppress it. And they know that those who practice the things they practice deserve to die. But not only do they do them, they give approval, praise, and support to those who come and practice them with them. Now that's what Romans chapter 1 says. The wrath of God is revealed against this sinful race who suppress the truth. Now, what is the point? If you deny ontological truth, that is, if you deny the truth of being, ontological truth that's being. If you deny ontological truth, that God exists, you deny the being of God. God who is, that's the one who is the ground and foundation of all truth. If you deny that, then you deny epistemological truth. Epistemology is just, how do we know what we know? Then you deny that there is a such thing as truth. If you deny God's existence, you deny ontological truth, then you have denied that that truth even exists at all. And that leads to a third denial, the denial of biological truth. If you start there, you always end up here, as Romans 1 shows. You will deny the beautiful essence of humanity, which is our complementary nature, that we're created, male and female, man and woman, that we bear the image of our Creator for the purpose. Why? Why do we bear His image? Why has He done this? So that we can glorify Him. That's our purpose. One of the ways we do that, one of the main ways we do that, is that we share in the creative process. When two become one flesh, God made us to fit together, and from that union comes flesh. Now that's some technology. That's some transhumanism for you. There is no technology. Nothing can surpass that miracle. We are created for His glory to procreate, multiply, and fill the earth with humanity. That's why we're here. That was our charge, to multiply and fill the earth with humanity, and to subdue the earth for our survival and prosperity, for God's glory. That is the foundation of everything. And when the church or factions professing Christians contradict that essential truth by suggesting that we have evolved from lower animals, well then gender fluidity and abortion become tolerable. Let God be true and every man a liar. How long will you go on limping between two opinions? If the Lord is God, serve Him. If Baal is God, serve him. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. But the establishment today has embraced transhumanism, posthumanism, which operates on an opposite anthropology, saying that man is the scourge of the earth, that man must be culled to drastically reduce population, not to multiply, but to reduce population to save the earth. God said, be fruitful and multiply to save man. They say, cull man to save the earth. We are immersed today in a culture of death. The serpent is thrashing, and his children are lathered up and doing his will eagerly and violently. As they do it, they mask it in words like nice. They mask it in words like safe. Stay safe. They mask it in words like tolerant. We have a Department of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at our university because we just want to create an atmosphere where everyone feels welcome. Even the rapists? Even the murderers? You want everyone to feel welcome? Are you really inclusive? But as Christians, we are people of love and we always seek a peaceful solution. But the history of Christianity, my friends, is not peaceful. We're peaceful. But the world hates us. The history of Christianity you can follow it through history by a crimson trail. It is saturated in blood. The blood of Christians. I assure you that their doctrine is the exact opposite of the words they use. They are not tolerant. They are not nice. They are not safe. They are not diverse. They are not equitable. They are not inclusive. They want blood. And our command from our Lord, our Savior, our King is to go therefore right into the teeth of the death cult and preach this gospel of Jesus Christ and make disciples of those dangerous people. That's our command. Because God has His people in the midst of the screaming, bloodthirsty horde. And our call is to go get them. Our call is not to shiver and cower in fear. Stay on the couch. Our call is to go therefore and make disciples of the death cult. That is how God has chosen to grow His kingdom. And what a privilege, my friends, what a privilege. As we just studied in John chapter 15 and 16, what a privilege it is, it will be, to suffer for our King. Anyone, any martyr who ever suffered for Christ where it was recorded, always said, what a privilege, what an honor, what a joy it was to suffer for Christ. Therefore, our conscience must be second. Discipleship first. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. 1978, at a speech at Harvard University, said, "Many people living in the West are dissatisfied with their own society. They despise it or accuse it of not being up to the level of maturity attained by mankind. A number of such critics turn to socialism. Say that's the way. Socialism is a false and dangerous current. Having experienced applied socialism in a country where the alternative has been realized, I certainly will not speak for it." The well-known Soviet mathematician Shafarevich, a member of the Soviet Academy of Science, wrote a brilliant book under the title Socialism. It is a profound analysis showing that socialism of any type and shade leads to the total destruction of the human spirit and to a leveling of mankind into death. Solzhenitsyn lays the blame for the deterioration of the West on a lack of courage and on the despiritualized humanism that originates in the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. We've kept the Enlightenment ideals, but jettisoned the morality after the clever philosophers and scientists killed off God, Nietzsche and the like, and put nothing back in his place. The Canadian political philosopher John Ralston Saul wrote of this dictatorship of reason in his 1992 book. He called them Voltaire's bastards. Solzhenitsyn claims the same disease affects the West today. With the difference that in the now former Soviet bloc, the people have suffered so long under human evil that they are ready to reevaluate their premises about human nature and our purpose in this life. And our purpose in this life is not merely to achieve happiness. You have to wonder, what would Alexander Solzhenitsyn today think of Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? What do you think of these people? What do you think of Greta Thunberg? Not to mention our distracting social justice movements, or even our political military apparatus, which is so lacking in vision, moral courage, and national unity that we cannot decisively win a conflict even against a much weaker nation. I don't think Solzhenitsyn would be very impressed. I think he would be horrified that his message and speech at Harvard in 1978 went nowhere. No one heeded his warning. But we're heeding it here today, sharing it with you. Because we want you to know the truth. I do not want to leave this tonight without the gospel being preached. We just read Romans 1, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven. It's a simple idea. Perfectly fair. God's wrath is declared and distributed from heaven against the human race. That is a fact. That is the truth. It's fair because we deserve it. We deserve God's wrath. We have to know who we are. That's where it starts. God's wrath must be. There must be justice, or the universe has no purpose. Without God's perfect and personal holy revulsion for evil, there would be no order, no justice in the universe. The only possibility would be chaos. And no human eye, no creature ever has seen chaos. It cannot be. God's common grace extends to all creation and all creatures. We have life. We have a world that sustains our existence for one reason. And that's because God chose to create. And He chose to offer communion with His creatures rather than not. And that makes Him good. When we talk about salvation, what do we mean? What are we saved from? Romans 1:16, Paul talked about it. First and foremost, we are saved not from Satan, not from the Biden regime. We're not saved from Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum or the United Nations or the Pope. We're not saved from the devil. We're saved from the wrath of God that we righteously deserve. Unless there's something to be saved from, there's no point in talking about salvation to begin with. When Paul gives the gospel in Romans chapter 1, his goal is not to proclaim the good news, but to demonstrate the absolute necessity of the good news of salvation from God's righteous wrath. Only Jesus Christ took the full wrath of God unmixed and rose again. You won't be able to do that. You can't. But He's done it for you. The wrath of God is not revealed in the gospel when we preach it, but it is seen in the facts of human experience. We know who we are. When people say, our problem is this or it's that, it's oppression, it's social justice, we say, no, our problem is this, that God created the world. And God created man. And He put the man in the garden. And He told him to keep the garden. He gave the man a command. And He held that man to a perfect, perpetual obedience. And He promised the man life if he kept it and death if he didn't. And he didn't keep it. He ate. And because he ate, because of that one man, sin entered into the world and death came in through sin. And everyone born from that man through ordinary generation, that means a natural father, a flesh father, inherited that man's sin nature, Adam's sin nature. And because of that sin nature, we produce sins. Sins proceed from it. It's seen in our world. It's seen in our lives. And our world is broken because of that sin. And because of that sin, the sin in Adam and the sins that we choose, we stand guilty before this holy and righteous God. And we know that He's holy and we know that He's righteous. And because God has put it on our hearts, we crave justice. But the problem is, if God gives us justice, we all die. We need a way so that we don't have to face the justice, because we can't. We have no defense. And so that God, in His goodness, in His mercy, He sent forth His Son, who was not born of ordinary generation, not born of an earthly father, but was born of a virgin. The virgin birth matters because if Jesus was born of ordinary generation from a flesh father, then He would be born in sin, under Adam like the rest. But He wasn't born of ordinary generation. He was not born in sin. He was clean of sin. His record was clean, and He lived His entire life and kept it clean. He obeyed God's law. And because Jesus Christ is fully God and fully man, He obeys the law of God on our behalf in His active obedience, and then in His passive obedience, He went to the cross for us. God made Him who knew no sin to be sin for us. We like sheep had all gone astray. I did. You did. Each of us had turned to his own way. We had no hope. We had no way, no answer. No answer for this life or the next. And then the miracle. But God laid upon him, Christ, all of our sin. And Christ took it, bore it all, held it for us, and died holding it. Once for all. The just for the unjust. And God imputes our sinfulness to him, charges it, makes him responsible for our sin, and then our sin is nailed to the tree. Christ dies. Took the full wrath of God and rose again on the third day for our justification, to make us righteous before the Lord, before the Father. And the righteousness of Christ was imputed, charged to us. We get to carry his righteousness. When we stand before the Father, all he will see is the righteousness of Christ. That is amazing, because you don't deserve it. You didn't do anything to deserve it. He chose you. He chose you because he is love, and he loves you. He loves you in a way that we don't understand. Not fully. But he loved us enough to send that one and only sacrifice for us. The righteousness of Christ is actually imputed to us so that God can be both the just and the justifier of the one who places faith in Christ. And that's you. You feel that urge to make that choice now, to put your faith in him. There's no one else to put it in. But why did he do that? He did that so that all who come to Christ may enter in. And so that all those who place faith in Christ might be saved, but not only saved, not only set apart in the world, but then, remember, he didn't just save us, he made us ambassadors. Not only saved, but then we're sanctified throughout the rest of our lives, slowly growing, progressively growing in righteousness. Because he, Christ, the firstborn of many brethren, in him we're justified. And then we're adopted into the family of God, and we're sanctified and as his children. Your new family, your real new family. We begin to bear the family resemblance. Progressively, we're further sanctified throughout this life by the very same gospel that saves us. That's why I say this and repeat this all the time, because even if you are a Christian, the gospel is for you too. The gospel sanctifies us also. It saves people. And it also sanctifies us. Hopefully every time you hear it, you hear something new. It means something more rich, a more rich understanding to you. But not only that, one day, when it's all said and done, we're not just saved from the penalty of sin, not just saved from the power of sin, but one day we will be glorified and saved from the very presence of sin. There will be no death. There will be no pain. There will be no hunger. There will be no tears. No death, no death, no death. We're saved from the very presence of sin. And that is the gospel that we preach. No more, no less. That's the gospel that we need. And that's the gospel. That is more than enough. God bless you, my friends. We'll see you next time.
The hammer comes down and beats you over the head for the rest of your life with a big national security stick. And so that people learn to duck their head and not speak up. Because bad idea now.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Citizens are advised to take the following steps.
Find us, armoroftruth.net.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel.
This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test.